Holiday Plus One, a paranormal Christmas rom-com with magic, mistletoe, and holiday chaos by Win Valentine. Copyright 2024 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise, without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco, audiobook narrator, revoicer, Delilah. Chapter 1, Mistletoe Madness. Jenna Matthews stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the delete button as her mother's latest text glowed accusingly on the screen. Just met Carol's nephew at book club. Harvard grad, loves his mother, single. For the love of... Jenna dropped her head onto her desk with a thunk. The steady hum of her office's fluorescent lights did nothing to drown out the ping of another incoming message. Without looking, she knew it would be another not-so-subtle reminder that her mother's Christmas Eve dinner was less than 2 weeks away, and Jenna was still devastatingly, tragically single. The charm bracelet on her wrist, a family heirloom she couldn't bring herself to remove, gave an ominous warm tingle. "Don't you start," she muttered, shooting it a warning glance. The tiny silver charms clinked together innocently, but she knew better. After 15 years of suppressing her magic, she recognized the signs of an impending magical incident. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail notification. The 7th this week. "Delete, delete, delete," she chanted, jabbing at her screen. The bracelet pulsed, and a spark of blue light arced between the charms. No, absolutely not. Too late. Her coffee mug jerked sideways as if shoved by an invisible hand, sending a wave of lukewarm coffee cascading across her keyboard. Perfect. This is just perfect. Jenna grabbed tissues from her desk drawer, dabbing frantically at the keys, while her bracelet hummed with what felt suspiciously like satisfaction. This is exactly why I don't do magic anymore. One emotional moment, and suddenly everything's chaos and property damage. After salvaging what she could of her keyboard, Jenna slumped back in her chair and pulled up her phone's app store. The dating apps she'd downloaded last week had been disasters. Turns out, "must love cats" was code for owns 17 felines and a concerning amount of cat-themed furniture. But there had to be something, anything, that could solve her Christmas dinner dilemma. That's when she saw it. Sandwiched between Love at First Swipe and Millionaire Matchmaker was an app with a simple red bow logo. Rent a date, professional companionship for every occasion. This is pathetic, Jenna told herself, even as she downloaded the app. This is a new low. The bracelet warmed encouragingly. Oh, shut up. You're the reason I'm in this mess. The app's interface was surprisingly sleek, with categories ranging from Wedding Plus One to Make Your Ex Jealous. Jenna selected Family Function and began scrolling through profiles of clean-cut, professional-looking men who promised to charm parents and remember complicated family stories on command. She was about to give up when a particular profile caught her eye. Logan Price smiled up from her screen, all tousled dark blonde hair and genuine warmth. His credentials were impressive. Experienced with high-pressure family events, skilled at small talk, allergic to none of her mother's signature holiday dishes. Finally, someone normal. Her optimism died as she reached the last line of his bio. Ghost whispering services included at no extra charge. Jenna groaned. "You've got to be kidding me." She moved to close the app, but her phone suddenly felt warm in her hands. The bracelet actually chimed like a tiny bell. "No," she told it firmly. "Absolutely not. I'm not hiring a ghost whisperer as my fake boyfriend. That's where I draw the line." Her phone dinged with another text. This one included a photo of her mother's book club, specifically highlighting a balding man in his 40s wearing a Christmas sweater with single and ready to jingle emblazoned across the chest. Okay, fine. Jenna grabbed her salad and stress stabbed a cherry tomato. Let me make a list. That's rational. That's what normal people do when contemplating hiring supernatural rented dates. She pulled out a notepad, drawing a neat line down the middle. Pros, cons. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video of her mother's book club performing what appeared to be a choreographed dance to All I Want for Christmas Is You. That's it. Jenna grabbed her phone and pulled up the agency's number before she could talk herself out of it. The line rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. Rent a date, where every occasion deserves the perfect plus one. How can I help you today? Hi, yes, I'm calling about Logan Price's availability for Christmas Eve. Jenna's voice cracked slightly. The potted peace lily on her desk suddenly burst into bloom, its white flowers unfurling like time-lapse photography. Oh, wonderful choice. Let me check his schedule. Keys clacked in the background, while Jenna watched in horror as her succulent collection began to flower in sympathy with the lily. You're in luck. Mr. Price has an opening on Christmas Eve. Would you like to schedule a meet and greet to discuss your needs? A tiny cactus on her windowsill sprouted a single pink flower. Jenna squeezed her eyes shut. Yes, fine, great. As soon as possible, please. More typing. He has availability tomorrow afternoon at 3. Does that work for you? The orchid in the corner, which Jenna had been certain was dead for months, suddenly sprouted 3 perfect blooms. Tomorrow's perfect. The sooner the better. Before I change my mind or my office turns into a botanical garden. I'm sorry, what was that last part? Nothing. Nothing. Tomorrow at 3. Just send me the details. Jenna ended the call and dropped her phone like it had burned her. The bracelet gave one last satisfied tingle before going quiet. This is crazy, she told her newly flourishing plant collection. This is absolutely insane. She looked at her phone, which had just lit up with another text from her mother, this one featuring a countdown clock to Christmas Eve dinner. The peace lily stretched toward her as if nodding in agreement. Jenna buried her face in her hands and wondered, not for the first time, if maybe she should have just become a cat lady after all. 3 hours and one minor magical incident with the office printer later, Jenna found herself obsessively checking her watch outside the Daily Grind coffee shop. She'd chosen this location carefully. Public enough to be safe, close enough to work for a quick escape if needed, and most importantly, nowhere near any of her mother's usual haunts. The last thing she needed was someone from the neighborhood book club spotting her meeting with a professional ghost whisperer. Jenna arrived 15 minutes early to the coffee shop, ordered the strongest latte they had, and chose a strategic corner table that gave her a clear view of both exits, just in case she needed to make a quick escape from the obviously deranged ghost whisperer she'd agreed to hire. Jenna arrived 15 minutes early to the coffee shop, ordered the strongest latte they had, and chose a strategic corner table that gave her a clear view of both exits, just in case she needed to make a quick escape from the obviously deranged ghost whisperer she'd agreed to hire. The bracelet hummed against her wrist, and she tugged her sleeve down to cover it. Don't start, she muttered. Right on time. Exactly on time, actually. Logan Price walked through the door. His dating profile hadn't done him justice. The casual confidence in his stride, the way his Henley shirt hit just right, the slight curl of his hair that looked artfully messy rather than actually messy, it all screamed trouble. He spotted her immediately, as if he'd known exactly where to look. Jenna busied herself with her phone, pretending she hadn't been watching him approach. Jenna Matthews? His voice carried a hint of amusement. I'm Logan Price, though I see you already have company. She looked up, ready to deliver a carefully rehearsed greeting. Instead, she choked on her latte. What? I'm alone. Right. Logan slid into the seat across from her, setting down his own coffee. Except for your ghostly companion. Grandmother, I'm guessing? She has that particular look about her. The coffee burned Jenna's throat as she coughed. I don't know what you're talking about. This is supposed to be a professional arrangement about pretending to date, not whatever this is. Professional is exactly what I am. Logan leaned back, completely at ease. Part of my service is understanding my client's situation, and your situation includes a very determined looking elderly spirit who's currently adjusting the wreath on that window. Jenna refused to look at the window. If she looked, she'd see Grandma Betty's spectral form fussing with the decorations, and then she'd have to acknowledge that her grandmother's ghost had followed her to a coffee shop. And then she'd have to deal with the fact that she'd accidentally hired possibly the one fake boyfriend in Seattle who could actually see ghosts. And your bracelet is glowing, Logan pointed out helpfully. Jenna yanked her sleeve down further, but the silver charms were definitely emanating a soft blue light. It's reflecting the holiday lights. Interesting theory. Logan's eyes crinkled at the corners, especially since the holiday lights are currently off. Look, Jenna pulled out the contract she'd printed. Can we focus on the actual reason we're here? I need a date for Christmas Eve dinner who can convince my family we're dating so they'll stop trying to set me up with every eligible man in the greater Seattle area. Of course. Logan accepted the papers with a nod that was almost too understanding. Though I should mention that ghostly relatives can complicate these situations. They tend to have strong opinions about relationships. The situation is already complicated enough. Jenna tapped the contract. One dinner, 4 hours max. Standard meet the family scenario with the usual holiday trimmings. Nothing supernatural required. Logan skimmed the contract, his expression thoughtful. Your family's big on traditions, I'm guessing? Christmas Eve dinner's probably been held at the same house for generations. Everyone has their assigned seats. And there's at least 3 dishes that absolutely have to be made following great-great-grandmother's exact recipe. Jenna stared at him. How did you? Part of the job. He smiled, and it was entirely too charming. Also, your grandmother just nodded very enthusiastically at everything I said. Stop that. Jenna grabbed her pen. Here's where we sign. Just normal signatures, normal contract, normal fake dating arrangement. Normal is relative. Logan accepted the pen, his fingers brushing hers. Especially in families with inherited magical talents. The pen clattered to the table. I never said anything about. You didn't have to. The charm bracelet's giving off enough magical energy to power a small Christmas tree. He signed with a flourish, which, by the way, is impressive considering how hard you're trying to suppress it. I am not. Jenna snatched the pen back, but before she could sign, Logan's attention shifted to the window. Betty says you haven't decorated your apartment yet, he said conversationally. She's very concerned about that. Apparently, it's bad luck in your family to wait past December 1st. The holiday lights around the coffee shop's windows suddenly blazed to life, then began blinking in a frantic pattern. Several customers looked up in confusion. Stop. Talking to my grandmother. Jenna gripped the pen so hard she worried it might snap. She's very insistent. Logan took a sip of his coffee, maddeningly calm. Something about a prophecy? All the holiday lights in the coffee shop flickered wildly. The barista started hitting buttons on the control panel in confusion. There's no prophecy. Jenna scrawled her signature so forcefully the pen nearly tore through the paper. There's no magic. There's just a normal family dinner that you're going to attend as my normal fake boyfriend. That's it. Of course. Logan tucked the contract into his jacket pocket, but his eyes danced with something that looked dangerously like delight. Though you might want to do something about the light show before someone calls an electrician. Jenna closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and forced herself to calm down. The lights steadied, returning to their normal, cheerful twinkle. Nicely done. Logan stood, straightening his jacket. I'll text you to arrange the details. And Jenna? His smile softened. Don't worry too much. I'm very good at what I do. All aspects of what I do. He headed for the door, pausing briefly by the window to nod politely at what appeared to be empty air. Lovely to meet you too, Betty. I'm looking forward to Christmas Eve. Jenna waited until he was gone before dropping her head onto the table with a thunk. The bracelet chimed happily against the wood. This, she informed the table, is going to be a disaster. From the window came the distinct sound of her grandmother's spectral laughter. Chapter 2. Home for the Haunted Holidays. Logan pulled up to the Matthews family home, his truck's headlights sweeping across a Victorian masterpiece dressed in its holiday finest. or rather, dressing itself in its holiday finest. He watched, fascinated, as strands of Christmas lights subtly shifted and twinkled in patterns that definitely weren't programmed into any standard timer. The wreaths on the windows seemed to perk up at his arrival, straightening their red velvet bows like proud soldiers standing at attention. He checked his phone one last time, reviewing the extensive notes Jenna had sent about their cover story. They'd met at a bookstore 3 months ago, bonding over their shared love of mystery novels. Their first date had been coffee and pastries at that little cafe on 4th Street. He'd won her over with his wit and charm, though Logan suspected the real Jenna would sooner eat coal than admit to being charmed by anyone. A wreath on the nearest window gave an excited little wiggle. "I see you too," he murmured, climbing out of his truck. The front porch lights brightened in welcome, and he could have sworn the garland along the railing shifted to make way for his hand. The door flew open before he could knock. Jenna stood there, looking slightly frazzled in a green sweater dress that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Her charm bracelet was practically disco dancing with magical energy. "You're early," she hissed, grabbing his arm and pulling him onto the porch. Behind her, a length of garland was doing an impressive impression of a synchronized swimming routine. Traffic was light. He nodded toward the performing greenery. "Should we address the dancing garland in the room?" "No, we should not." Jenna crossed her arms. "Remember the story? We met it, but Logan wasn't looking at the garland anymore. His head was tilted slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your magical signature," he said carefully, as if reading something written in invisible ink. "It's fractured, like a healing spell that rebounded." Jenna stiffened, her charm bracelet suddenly cold against her wrist. "We're not talking about that." Her voice held enough ice to freeze the garland mid-dance. "Just stick to the script. First date at Maple Street Cafe, you were impossibly charming." "Impossibly." Logan pressed a hand to his chest in mock offense, smoothly shifting back to their rehearsed banter, though his eyes held a new understanding. "I'll have you know I'm exactly the right amount of charming." "Betty, don't encourage him," Jenna muttered, then caught herself. "I mean, there's no one. Just follow my lead. Okay?" She turned to open the door, missing the way Logan exchanged an amused glance with the empty air beside the wind chime. The moment they stepped into the foyer, however, his attention snapped to the overwhelming surge of magical energy that hit him like a warm, tingling wave. He stopped mid-stride, momentarily stunned by the sheer volume of supernatural activity buzzing through the house. The coat rack to their left, a gorgeous antique with brass fittings, actually reached out one of its hooks and tugged at his jacket sleeve. "Oh, here, let me—" Jenna started to reach for his coat, but the rack was faster, gently pulling the jacket from his shoulders with the expertise of a 5-star hotel butler. "That's quite the coat rack," Logan remarked, watching as it adjusted his jacket to hang perfectly centered. "Family heirloom," Jenna said quickly. "Very old. Victorian era. They made them very sturdy back then." The coat rack preened, its brass fittings gleaming just a bit brighter. "Must have been quite the craftsman," Logan mused. "I don't think I've ever seen an antique that still moves with such smooth—" "Look at the time." Jenna's voice jumped half an octave. "We should head to the living room. Mom's probably wondering where we are." A crash from the next room drew their attention. Logan peered around the corner into what appeared to be the formal living room, dominated by the most magnificent Christmas tree he'd ever seen. It stretched nearly to the ceiling, decorated with what had to be generations' worth of ornaments. Ornaments that were, at this very moment, playing what looked like an elaborate game of musical chairs. A vintage glass ball was attempting to swap places with a handmade star, while a ceramic angel supervised the whole operation from her perch near the top. As they watched, a pinecone ornament got into what appeared to be an argument with a felt snowman over prime real estate on a middle branch. Logan searched for a diplomatic way to describe the choreographed chaos. "An old family tradition," Jenna blurted. "We rearrange the ornaments every year, for luck. It's very normal." The angel ornament turned to face them and actually winked. "Perfectly normal," Logan agreed solemnly, though his eyes sparkled with barely contained amusement. Though I have to say, your ornaments have excellent taste. That vintage ball definitely belongs in the front. The glass ornament in question swung happily on its branch, sending prisms of light dancing across the walls. Don't. Encourage them. Jenna grabbed his arm, her charm bracelet practically vibrating against his sleeve. The living room is through here, and remember, everything is completely normal. As if on cue, the coat rack waved one of its hooks in farewell. The garland in the foyer formed itself into a perfect heart shape, and the angel ornament began conducting what looked like a tiny orchestra of tinsel. Of course, Logan said, allowing her to pull him toward the living room. Just your average, normal Christmas Eve dinner. Though I have to ask, he leaned closer, lowering his voice, does your family's definition of normal usually involve performing holiday decorations, or is that just a special occasion thing? The look Jenna gave him could have frozen hot cocoa. Just act natural. Naturally, he agreed, then added under his breath, though I think your house might have different ideas about what that means. Behind them, the Christmas tree ornaments broke into what could only be described as a conga line. Just as Jenna opened her mouth to comment on the ornament's impromptu dance party, a silvery figure materialized near the carved oak staircase. Grandma Betty stood there in all her spectral glory, complete with her beloved Christmas apron and the wooden spoon she'd used to stir countless batches of holiday cookies. Logan's face lit up with genuine warmth. Mrs. Matthews Sr., I presume? Jenna steadfastly focused on adjusting her charm bracelet, pretending the empty air by the stairs held absolutely nothing of interest. The bracelet, however, had other ideas, choosing that moment to emit a soft golden glow. Betty glided forward, circling Logan with the precise attention of an art curator examining a particularly promising acquisition. My, she mused, her voice carrying that distinctive ethereal quality only Logan could hear. Would you look at those cheekbones? And those eyes, perfect for ghost seeing. Strong shoulders, too. Much better than that insurance salesman from last spring. Thank you, Logan replied, trying to keep his voice low. Though I'm not sure about the insurance salesman comparison. Jenna's head snapped up. What insurance salesman? Oh, just making conversation with your grandmother about... We are not doing this, Jenna hissed. We are not having a conversation with my dead grandmother about my dating history. Speaking of dating, Betty's spectral form drifted closer to Logan. What exactly are your intentions with my granddaughter? And don't give me any of that professional escort nonsense. I've been watching you since you pulled up in that sensible hybrid car. Above them, a sprig of mistletoe that had been innocently decorating the archway began to inch its way across the ceiling, moving with all the subtlety of a cat stalking its prey. Logan, mid-response to Betty's interrogation, smoothly sidestepped the mistletoe's first attempt to position itself overhead, his practiced movements suggesting this wasn't his first encounter with enchanted holiday decorations. I assure you, Mrs. Matthews, your granddaughter's welfare is my top priority. He took 2 casual steps to the left, causing the mistletoe to miss again, its leaves rustling in what could only be described as frustration. Though I have to admire your dedication to traditional holiday matchmaking. Betty cackled with delight, her form shimmering with approval as she drifted closer to inspect him, the temperature dropping several degrees where she passed. Oh, he's quick! Did you see that dodge, Jenna? This one's got reflexes! Much better than that accountant I tried to set you up with last Easter, who walked straight into the possessed egg basket. I am not seeing anything, Jenna muttered through clenched teeth, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her sweater. Because there is nothing to see. The hall mirror caught Betty's reflection as she turned toward the side table, where a plate of Christmas cookies sat in pristine formation, each one decorated with Mrs. Matthews' signature precision. With a flick of her spectral spoon, the cookies rose and began to perform what looked like a synchronized swimming routine, complete with figure eights and perfect pirouettes. A snickerdoodle took the lead, leaving a trail of cinnamon in its wake. Jenna dropped her face into her hands, her ears burning red. This is not happening. Actually, their form is quite impressive, Logan observed, watching a gingerbread man execute a flawless backflip before catching a shortbread cookie in what appeared to be a trust fall. The sugar cookies especially have excellent rhythm, though that chocolate chip seems to be struggling with the tempo. Jenna? Logan? Mrs. Matthews' voice called from the kitchen, accompanied by the warm scent of vanilla and nutmeg. Is that you two I hear talking? Jenna grabbed Logan's arm with enough force to make him wince, her fingers digging into his Henley sleeve. Yes, Mom. Just showing Logan some family photos. She began steering him toward the kitchen, but not before Betty decided to make every single person in said family photos wink at them as they passed, including Jenna's third-grade school picture, where she was missing both front teeth. Your grandmother seems lovely, Logan whispered as they moved down the hall, ducking under another determined mistletoe assault. Very spirited. Oh, yes, she's a real joy, Jenna whispered back, her voice dripping with sarcasm like icing from an over-decorated gingerbread house. Nothing says happy holidays like a ghost who thinks she's running a supernatural dating service. Did you know last Valentine's Day, she tried to set me up with our mailman by making heart-shaped clouds follow him around his entire route? The poor man had to explain to his supervisor why it was suddenly raining rose petals every time he delivered our mail. Behind them, Betty had turned her attention to the collection of decorative nutcrackers arranged on a hallway table, their painted faces gleaming in the soft light. She raised her wooden spoon like a conductor's baton, and the nutcrackers immediately snapped to attention, their tiny boots clicking against the wood. As she began an enthusiastic rendition of Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, the nutcrackers launched into a choreographed routine that would have made Tchaikovsky proud, complete with synchronized, jaw-cracking percussion. Logan pressed his lips together, shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter as one particularly enthusiastic nutcracker attempted a grand jeté and nearly toppled into its neighbor, causing a domino effect of flailing wooden arms. Don't you dare laugh, Jenna warned, though the corner of her mouth twitched traitorously. If she thinks you're encouraging this, we'll never hear the end of it. Last time someone complimented her performance art, she spent a week making the garden gnomes recreate scenes from Swan Lake. I wouldn't dream of it, Logan assured her, dodging another strategic mistletoe attack that had grown increasingly elaborate in its pursuit patterns. Though I have to say, your grandmother's conducting skills are. If you finish that sentence with haunting, I'm firing you right now. The nutcrackers hit their final pose with a flourish. One leg extended dramatically while their painted mustaches quivered with exertion, and Betty's ghost took an elaborate bow, her spectral apron floating dramatically around her as she basked in her invisible audience's appreciation. Too late, Logan murmured as they approached the kitchen door, the smell of fresh-baked cookies growing stronger with each step. I think she's already decided to keep me. Behind them, Betty beamed and used her spoon to draw a glowing heart in the air, which promptly chased after them down the hallway like a determined Cupid. Chapter 3. Sweater Shenanigans. Mrs. Matthews burst through the kitchen doorway in a cloud of sugar and sparkles, brandishing what looked suspiciously like matching sweaters. There you are. I've been waiting all morning to give you these. Jenna's stomach dropped faster than a falling ornament. The sweaters were a matching set in festive red and green, each featuring an elaborately knitted reindeer whose nose, dear Lord, actually lit up. Betty hovered near the ceiling, radiating such smug satisfaction that the chandelier crystals tinkled in response. Mom, we really don't need... Nonsense, I made them specially. Mrs. Matthews thrust the sweaters forward, the reindeer noses glowing with alarming intensity. Logan, dear, I hope you don't mind. When Betty mentioned you were coming, I just couldn't resist. Jenna shot a glare at her grandmother, who was now conducting the chandelier crystals in what appeared to be a twinkling rendition of All I Want for Christmas Is You. Logan, traitor that he was, accepted his sweater with a charming smile. This is incredible, Mrs. Matthews. I've never seen such unique craftsmanship. He ran his fingers along the intricate pattern, genuine appreciation in his voice. Is that actual silver thread in the snowflakes? Oh, just a touch. Mrs. Matthews beamed, while Betty's ghost did a victory spin that sent sparks of spectral light dancing across the ceiling. For that extra bit of holiday magic, Jenna knew that tone. It was the same one her mother used when she'd accidentally enchanted an entire batch of chocolate chip cookies to spell out "Call your mother" in Morse code every time someone took a bite. "Mom," Jenna started, but Mrs. Matthews was already helping Logan into his sweater, fussing with the collar like she'd known him for years instead of minutes. "And here's yours, sweetheart." Her mother held out the matching sweater with an expectant smile that could have powered all the Christmas lights in the neighborhood. Jenna took it with the enthusiasm of someone accepting a live rattlesnake. The moment the yarn touched her skin, she felt it, a warm, tingling sensation that definitely wasn't standard wool behavior. She pulled it over her head, already formulating several choice words about magical meddling when she caught Logan's eye. The reindeer nose on her sweater twitched. Actually twitched, like a tiny, knitted Rudolph coming to life on her chest. "Oh, they look perfect together." Mrs. Matthews clasped her hands in delight while Betty conducted a particularly vigorous crescendo above their heads. "Let me get my camera." "Mom, we don't need..." But Mrs. Matthews had already disappeared in a whirl of holiday enthusiasm, leaving behind a trail of glittering sugar that definitely hadn't been there before. Jenna took a strategic step away from Logan, only to feel her sweater constrict around her waist like a woolly python. Before she could process what was happening, she found herself sliding across the hardwood floor, directly into Logan's personal space. "Having some trouble there?" Logan asked, amusement dancing in his eyes as Jenna windmilled her arms, trying to maintain her balance. "This is not funny," she hissed, attempting to create distance again. The sweater responded by knitting itself even tighter, practically shoving her against Logan's chest. Their reindeer noses blinked in perfect synchronization, casting a rosy glow between them. Betty's ghost twirled her wooden spoon like a baton, and suddenly, the Christmas tree lights began pulsing in a suspiciously romantic pattern. "Everyone gather by the tree." Mrs. Matthews reappeared, camera in hand, tinsel somehow already perfectly arranged in her hair. "Oh, don't you two look cozy?" "Cozy isn't exactly the word I'd use," Jenna muttered, trying to ignore how the silver threads in her sweater had begun weaving themselves into tiny hearts along the sleeves. She attempted to shift away from Logan again, but the sweater was having none of it. It actually pulled her closer, molding itself around her until she was pressed against Logan's side like some kind of holiday-themed straitjacket. "Perfect." Mrs. Matthews adjusted her camera while Betty positioned herself behind her daughter, ghostly wooden spoon raised like a conductor's baton. "Now, Logan, why don't you put your arm around Jenna?" Before Logan could move, Jenna's sweater took matters into its own hands. The fabric at her waist practically liquefied, reforming itself to fit perfectly against Logan's side while simultaneously forcing her to lean into him. The reindeer nose on her chest gave an enthusiastic twinkle. "Oh, you two look so natural together," Mrs. Matthews cooed, snapping photos with the intensity of a paparazzi who'd just spotted a celebrity scandal. "Betty, dear, can you adjust the tree lights? We need that perfect holiday glow." Betty's ghost eagerly complied, conducting the Christmas lights into a soft, romantic shimmer that somehow managed to highlight every point of contact between Jenna and Logan. The ornaments began rotating slowly, catching the light in a way that created what looked suspiciously like floating hearts in the air around them. "Mom, I think we have enough pictures," Jenna tried, but her sweater chose that moment to sprout additional yarn, wrapping around Logan's arm like tinsel on a tree branch. "Just a few more." Mrs. Matthews adjusted her angle while Betty orchestrated an impromptu snowfall of ghostly sparkles above their heads. "Logan, dear, could you look at Jenna like she's just said something adorably funny?" "Oh, God," Jenna groaned, but Logan was already turning toward her with a perfectly crafted expression of fond amusement, like she was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all season. The reindeer noses on both their sweaters lit up like runway beacons, casting everything in a rosy glow that made her traitorous heart skip a beat. Her sweater, apparently sensing weakness, took the opportunity to adjust its knitting pattern, creating what felt like a perfect Logan-shaped indent for her to fit against. "Beautiful," Mrs. Matthews exclaimed, while Betty conducted the tree lights into what was definitely the opening bars of "Can't Help Falling in Love." "You two are just so perfect together." It's like you were magically meant to be." Jenna opened her mouth to protest, but at that exact moment, both reindeer noses gave an emphatic twinkle, and she found herself looking up into Logan's eyes. The enchanted silver thread in their sweaters sparked, creating tiny constellations of light between them. And for just a moment, she forgot this was all supposed to be pretend. Then Betty's ghost started making the mistletoe creep across the ceiling toward them. And reality came crashing back. "Okay, that's enough photos," Jenna announced, trying to extract herself from both the sweater's embrace and Logan's warmth. The yarn responded by knitting itself even more securely around them both, creating an intricate pattern that looked suspiciously like wedding bells along the hem. "But we haven't even done the matching poses yet," Mrs. Matthews protested, while Betty began arranging the tree ornaments into what appeared to be a heart-shaped frame around them. Logan, who still hadn't removed his arm from where Jenna's sweater had trapped it, leaned down to whisper, "You know, for a fake boyfriend, I think I'm doing pretty well with the family photos." "Don't encourage them," Jenna whispered back, ignoring how her sweater's reindeer nose gave an appreciative wiggle at their proximity. "The last time Mom got this excited about my dating life, she enchanted all the mirrors in the house to give relationship advice. Do you know how awkward it is to have your bathroom mirror critique your outfit choices and suggest more flattering first date makeup techniques?" Logan settled into the Matthews overstuffed armchair like he'd been visiting for years, his easy smile making Jenna's stomach do an unwanted flip. Her sweater, apparently sensing her reaction, sent a ripple of warmth through her chest. "So, Logan," Mrs. Matthews called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that too-sweet tone that made Jenna immediately tense. "Tell us more about your event planning business." "Well," Logan's eyes twinkled as he launched into a story about a particularly challenging wedding. Jenna had to admit he was good, weaving tales about difficult clients and unexpected surprises that cleverly masked any supernatural elements. Though when he mentioned a particularly spirited mother of the bride, Betty's ghost nearly doubled over with laughter. Jenna's sweater sleeves, apparently bored with behaving, began slowly creeping toward Logan's arm. She tried to tuck them under herself, but the yarn had other ideas, stretching like taffy until it could wrap around Logan's wrist. And then the cake started floating. Falling. Logan caught himself smoothly, but we managed to save it with some quick thinking and a lot of luck. "How wonderful!" Mrs. Youth Matthews clasped her hands together. "Jenna, honey, didn't you mention wanting to start your own business someday? Maybe Logan could give you some tips." "Mom," Jenna started, but her sweater chose that moment to constrict around her shoulders, preventing her from crossing her arms. She ended up doing an awkward shoulder wiggle instead, which made Logan's lips twitch with poorly concealed amusement. "I need to check something in the kitchen," Jenna announced, pushing herself up. The sweater allowed this, though it kept one sleeve firmly attached to Logan's. "I'll help," Logan offered, following her with such natural grace you'd never know he was being dragged along by enchanted knitwear. Once in the kitchen, Jenna spun to face him. "Could you maybe be a little less perfect?" she hissed. "My mom's already planning our wedding in her head." Her sweater tightened reproachfully around her shoulders. "Sorry," Logan grinned, not looking sorry at all. "Should I spill something? Insult the decorations? Tell them I don't believe in Christmas magic?" "That's not." The sweater squeezed again and Jenna huffed. "You know what I mean, you're just so good at this." "Who wants hot chocolate?" Mrs. Matthews bustled in, carrying a tray of steaming mugs that sparkled with more than just marshmallows. "Is that cinnamon I smell?" Logan asked, accepting a mug. "And star anise? Plus something else I can't quite place." Mrs. Matthews beamed. "My secret ingredient. No one's ever guessed it before." Jenna knew that secret ingredient was actually a happiness charm her mother had perfected over years of holiday gatherings, but Logan's guess made her mother practically glow with delight. "Such a discerning palate," Mrs. Matthews cooed, while Betty's ghost pretended to wipe away proud tears. Logan caught Jenna's eye over his mug, and immediately both their sweaters' reindeer noses blazed to life, synchronized like Christmas lights on a timer. Betty clapped her translucent hands in delight, and Mrs. Matthews' eyes actually welled up. "Oh," Mrs. Matthews pressed a hand to her heart. Would you look at that? The sweaters know. They just know. I need to use the bathroom, Jenna announced abruptly, desperate for a moment alone. She made it exactly 10 feet down the hallway before her sweater went rigid, refusing to let her take another step away from Logan. Everything okay? Logan called from the kitchen, amusement clear in his voice. Jenna tried to move forward, but the sweater had other ideas. She ended up doing an awkward backward shuffle, like a malfunctioning wind-up toy, until she collided with something solid and warm. Logan's hands steadied her, and both their sweaters erupted in a light show that would put Times Square to shame. The reindeer noses pulsed in harmony, while the silver threading sparked and danced, creating intricate patterns of snowflakes and stars wherever they touched. "Careful there," Logan murmured, his breath stirring her hair. These sweaters seemed to have strong opinions about personal space. Jenna wanted to snap back with something witty, but her sweater chose that moment to melt into the softest, most comfortable piece of clothing she'd ever worn. The yarn practically purred against her skin, rewarding her momentary surrender with a warmth that felt suspiciously like a hug. "Oh, for crying out loud," she muttered, noticing Logan's growing smirk. "Don't you dare say anything." "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied, but his sweater's reindeer nose gave a knowing wink. "Though I have to say, as far as magical matchmaking goes, these sweaters have style." The yarn responded by getting even softer, and Jenna had to fight the urge to lean into its comfort. "This isn't funny." "It's a little funny," Logan countered, reaching out to untangle a strand of silver thread that had wound its way around her wrist. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, both sweaters hummed in satisfaction, their light display dimming to a warm, intimate glow. From the kitchen, Betty's ghost began conducting the refrigerator magnets in what sounded suspiciously like wedding bells, while Mrs. Matthews could be heard sniffling happily over the cookie tray. Jenna closed her eyes and counted to 10, but when she opened them, Logan was still there, looking unfairly handsome in his matching sweater. And her own sweater was still doing its best to turn her into a human-sized yarn cocoon of comfort. "You know," Logan said softly, "sometimes it's easier if you don't fight the magic." Her sweater gave an encouraging squeeze, as if to say, "Listen to the handsome ghost whisperer," and Jenna wondered when exactly she'd lost control of this situation. Probably around the time she'd decided hiring a fake boyfriend who could see ghosts was a good idea. Chapter 4. Cookies and Chaos. Jenna stormed into the darkened kitchen at midnight, flipping on lights with more force than necessary. Her enchanted sweater, which had refused all attempts at removal, including scissors, glowed softly in protest of her mood. She yanked open cabinets, pulling out flour, sugar, and spices, while muttering under her breath. "Normal cookies. That's all I want. Regular, non-magical, completely ordinary Christmas cookies that don't have opinions about my love life." The sweater tightened slightly around her shoulders. "Oh, don't you start," she told it, measuring flour with sharp, precise movements. "You've done enough damage for one day." A familiar silvery shimmer appeared near the cookbook stand, and Jenna pointedly ignored her grandmother's ghost as she flipped to the gingerbread recipe. Betty hovered innocently beside the measuring cups, but Jenna caught the spectral hand reaching for the ginger. "Don't even think about it, Grandma." "Think about what, dear?" Betty's ghost adjusted her eternal apron. "I'm just enjoying the midnight baking atmosphere. Very therapeutic." Jenna measured vanilla extract, pretending not to notice when Betty's transparent finger traced through the measurement lines, subtly altering them. The sweater's warmth increased, as if trying to distract her from her grandmother's meddling. "I saw that," Jenna said, but somehow ended up adding exactly the modified amount anyway. Her grandmother merely hummed Silent Night and drifted toward the spice rack. Despite Jenna's determination to make ordinary cookies, the dough came together with suspicious perfection. It rolled out smoothly on the first try, didn't stick to the counter, and each gingerbread man cutout separated cleanly from the cutter without losing any limbs, which never happened with normal dough. "This isn't suspicious at all," Jenna muttered, sliding the first tray into the oven. Her sweater's reindeer nose twinkled innocently. When the timer dinged, the cookies emerged golden brown and exactly uniform, each sporting rosy cheeks that definitely hadn't been part of the decoration. Jenna narrowed her eyes at them as she transferred them to the cooling rack. Since when do plain gingerbread men have rosy cheeks? Must be the lighting, Betty suggested, floating near the ceiling with poorly concealed satisfaction. Jenna turned to the sink, attacking the dishes with grim determination. The water couldn't quite drown out a tiny sound behind her, something between a cough and a giggle, followed by what seemed like the soft scrape of cookie against cooling rack. She froze, hands deep in soapy water. Please tell me that wasn't what I think it was. What wasn't what, dear? Betty asked, with the kind of innocence that immediately confirmed Jenna's suspicions. Slowly, Jenna turned around. On the cooling rack, a gingerbread man sat upright, adjusting its pristine frosting bow tie with tiny cookie hands. When it noticed her staring, it gave a jaunty wave. No, Jenna said firmly. Absolutely not. The cookie responded by standing up and brushing crumbs off its legs. Behind it, other gingerbread men were rising, stretching their arms and legs as if warming up for exercise. One cookie, sporting an elaborate frosting captain's hat, began directing the others into neat rows. This isn't happening, Jenna whispered, but her sweater's gentle squeeze seemed to say, oh, but it is. The captain cookie raised its tiny arms like a conductor, and to Jenna's horror, the entire battalion of gingerbread men began to march in perfect formation across the counter. Their tiny voices joined in a surprisingly harmonious rendition of We Wish You a Merry Christmas, complete with choreographed spins during the chorus. Now bring us some figgy pudding, sang the miniature cookie army, executing a flawless pivot turn at the counter's edge. I did not just hear cookies demanding figgy pudding, Jenna said to no one in particular, while her grandmother's ghost conducted along with obvious pride. The captain cookie paused mid-march to bow deeply in Jenna's direction, its frosting hat somehow staying perfectly in place. We wish you a Merry Christmas, it proclaimed in a voice like cinnamon and sugar, and a magical new year. That's not even the right lyric, Jenna protested weakly. The cookies responded by breaking into a kick line, their tiny legs moving in sync as they continued their musical number. Some of them had produced miniature candy cane canes, which they twirled with alarming expertise. Grandma, Jenna said through gritted teeth, what did you do to my cookies? Me? Betty's ghost pressed a transparent hand to her chest. I merely suggested a pinch of holiday spirit. They're just spreading Christmas cheer. Christmas cookies aren't supposed to spread anything except calories. But even as she said it, Jenna noticed more cookies rising from the second cooling rack, these ones sporting frosting scarves and tiny top hats. The captain cookie called out in its sweet voice, Company, attention! The entire cookie corps snapped to attention, candy canes held at parade rest. Prepare for the grand finale. There's a finale? Jenna asked faintly. In answer, the gingerbread army began an elaborate formation change, spinning and marching until they formed a perfect Christmas tree shape. The captain cookie produced a small frosting trumpet from nowhere and played a flourish that shouldn't have been possible with cookie lips. And now, it announced, the specialty number. To Jenna's increasing dismay, the cookies launched into what appeared to be a Broadway-worthy rendition of All I Want for Christmas Is You, complete with choreographed heart formations and synchronized frosting glitter throws. Her enchanted sweater chose that moment to join in, its lights pulsing in rhythm with the cookies' performance, while Betty's ghost wiped away proud tears. Grandma, Jenna said through gritted teeth, we need to talk about appropriate levels of magical intervention. Nonsense, Betty replied, beaming at her cookie chorus line. This is exactly the right amount of holiday magic. Besides, they have excellent rhythm for baked goods. The cookies finished their number with a spectacular formation change into a heart shape, with the captain cookie front and center, taking a deep bow. Thank you, it called out. We'll be here all night, or until someone gets peckish. Jenna stared at her grandmother's ghost. Please tell me they're not going to do this all night. Of course not, dear, Betty assured her, then added under her breath, they know at least 6 more holiday numbers. The cookies were already regrouping for what looked suspiciously like the opening formation of Santa Baby when the kitchen's ancient clock chimed midnight. Jenna jumped, realizing she'd spent nearly 2 hours watching baked goods perform Broadway numbers. Her mother had long since gone to bed, leaving her alone with her grandmother's ghostly entertainment and a growing headache. A soft creak from the hallway made the cookie captain freeze mid-choreography. Heavy footsteps approached, too heavy to be her mother's, and Jenna's heart did an unwanted flip as she recognized the familiar tread. Logan appeared in the kitchen doorway just as the Captain Cookie finished directing its troops to construct an elaborate gumdrop fortress around the cookie jar. His hair looked charmingly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it while trying not to laugh at the musical numbers echoing through the house. "So," he drawled, leaning against the doorframe, "I'm guessing these aren't your standard sugar cookies?" The Captain Cookie spun around, brandishing its candy cane like a sword. "Halt! Who goes there?" "Really?" Jenna muttered, watching as her grandmother's ghost drifted closer to inspect Logan's bedhead. "Now they're security guards?" "State your intentions with our baker," the captain demanded, while its troops continued stacking gumdrops with military precision. Logan straightened and offered a formal salute that made Jenna roll her eyes. "Logan Price, ma'am, or sir. I'm afraid I can't tell with gingerbread." The Captain Cookie preened, its frosting bow tie somehow gleaming brighter. "Sir will do, though I must say your technique needs work. Thumb along the eyebrow, soldier?" "Oh, for heaven's sake." Jenna stepped forward to grab the nearest cookie, but her sweater had other ideas. The material constricted around her waist, spinning her directly into Logan's chest. He caught her with practiced ease, his own sweater twinkling merrily at the contact. "Careful there," he murmured, steadying her with hands that felt impossibly warm through the enchanted yarn. "These little guys seem pretty determined." "They're cookies," Jenna hissed, trying to ignore how her sweater hummed contentedly at their proximity. "They're supposed to be eaten, not building fortifications out of candy." The Captain Cookie gasped, pressing a tiny hand to its chest. "Such barbarism! We are artists, madam, performers. We will not be reduced to mere snacks." Behind them, Betty's ghost had produced her spectral wooden spoon and was now conducting the remainder of the troops in a gentle humming of Silent Night. The cookies swayed in perfect harmony, their gumdrop wall growing ever higher. "If I may," Logan said, still not releasing Jenna from their awkward embrace, "perhaps we can reach a compromise?" The Captain Cookie lowered its candy cane weapon slightly. "We're listening." Logan finally stepped back, though Jenna's sweater gave a disappointed squeeze, and crouched down to eye level with the cookie commander. "What if, instead of barricading yourselves in the jar, you got to be the centerpiece of tomorrow's Christmas dinner? Front and center, where everyone could admire your choreography." "Logan," Jenna protested, but the captain was already stroking its frosting chin thoughtfully. "Go on," it said. "Full artistic control of your display?" Logan continued smoothly, as if negotiating with baked goods was perfectly normal. "Maybe even a special platform decorated with holly and—" "Tinsel," the captain interrupted excitedly. "Non-edible tinsel. Can't have the troops getting distracted." "Done," Logan agreed, extending his pinky finger toward the cookie. The captain shook it with its tiny hand, leaving a dusting of cinnamon sugar on Logan's skin. "Company," the captain called out. "Stand down. New orders. We're to prepare for a command performance tomorrow evening. Polish those buttons, straighten those scarves. I want to see every sprinkle gleaming." The cookies abandoned their gumdrop fortification, falling into neat rows as Betty conducted them in a victory march. One by one, they filed into the cookie jar, humming "We Are the Champions" under their breath. That was. Jenna searched for words as she watched Logan begin gathering scattered gumdrops. "Actually impressive." He grinned up at her from where he knelt, collecting stray sprinkles. Ghost whispering isn't so different from cookie diplomacy. It's all about listening to what they really want, which is apparently a Broadway career. "Hey, everyone needs a dream." He stood, dumping a handful of candies into the bowl. "Though maybe we should make sure the next batch stays a little more grounded?" Jenna's sweater warmed encouragingly as Logan stepped closer. "There's a simple charm," he said, voice soft. "Here, let me show you." Before she could protest, he took her hands in his, guiding them through a gentle gesture that looked suspiciously like conducting. Their sweaters glowed in perfect sync, casting dancing lights across the kitchen walls. "It's all in the wrist," he murmured, his chest barely brushing her back as he guided her movement. Like you're telling a story, but keeping the ending quiet. Jenna tried to focus on the motion and not on how right his hands felt around hers, or how her supposedly dormant magic sparked to life at his touch. The air shimmered briefly around them, and she felt the charm settle into place like a warm blanket. The last gingerbread soldier, sporting what looked like chocolate chip medals, paused at the cookie jar's entrance. It snapped a perfect salute, called out, "For glory and butter," and marched inside. Jenna realized she was still standing in Logan's loose embrace, their hands intertwined, sweaters creating a private light show. Even worse, she realized she didn't want to move. The kitchen felt cozy, magical in a way that had nothing to do with enchanted cookies, and everything to do with the way Logan's thumb was absently stroking her palm. Then she caught sight of her grandmother's expression, a look of such smug satisfaction that it snapped Jenna right out of the moment. Betty was practically glowing with ghostly triumph, her wooden spoon tapping against her palm like she was keeping score. I should. Jenna stepped away quickly, ignoring her sweater's protests. I need to check on something. Upstairs, away from here. She fled the kitchen, leaving Logan surrounded by scattered sprinkles and her grandmother's knowing smile. As she retreated, she could have sworn she heard the cookies start a muffled rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love from inside their jar. Chapter 5. Kisses and Confessions. Jenna crept along the hallway, hugging the wall like a spy in a particularly festive action movie. The living room doorway loomed ahead, and with it, that suspiciously mobile mistletoe she'd spotted earlier, dancing through the air in Logan's wake. If she could just make it to the stairs without, her sweater had other ideas. The cursed garment suddenly cinched tight around her middle, yanking her sideways with the force of a determined Christmas elf. No, 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 she hissed, grabbing for the banister, but the sweater was surprisingly strong for a piece of knitwear. It dragged her forward, like a puppet on strings, straight toward the doorway. At the exact same moment, Logan rounded the corner from the kitchen, stumbling slightly as if pulled by invisible hands. Their eyes met in mutual horror a split second before they collided, tumbling together until they stood, perfectly positioned, because of course they were, under the mistletoe. The plant practically preened, unfurling its leaves with a shimmer of magical satisfaction. Tendrils of silvery light spiraled down around them, creating a glowing dome that sparkled like fresh snow. "Oh, come on," Jenna muttered, pressing a hand against the barrier. It felt solid as glass, but warm to the touch. This is ridiculous. From her perch on the nearby armchair, Betty's ghost beamed with unconcealed delight. "Isn't it romantic?" she sighed, her translucent form practically vibrating with excitement. "The mistletoe's been in our family for generations. Your great-great-grandmother enchanted it herself. Fascinating family history," Jenna said through gritted teeth. "Really? But I need to." She attempted to duck under the barrier, but the mistletoe simply lowered its height, matching her movement perfectly. The barrier compressed until she had to straighten or risk an undignified crouch. Logan watched her efforts with barely contained amusement. "You know," he said, careful to maintain a professional tone despite the laughter dancing in his eyes, "magical mistletoe tends to get more insistent the longer you resist it." Speaking from experience, Jenna shot back, trying another angle only to have the barrier curve inward, pushing her closer to Logan. Professional observation. His sweater glowed warmly, synchronized with the pleased pulse from her own. "I once saw a particularly stubborn pair end up stuck for 3 hours. The mistletoe started playing mood music. As if on cue, the barrier shimmered, and the faint strains of All I Want for Christmas Is You filtered through the air." "Grandma," Jenna protested. Betty raised her spectral hands innocently. "Don't look at me, dear. That's all mistletoe." "This isn't," Jenna began, but had to stop when her next escape attempt resulted in the barrier shrinking another few inches. She found herself practically pressed against Logan's chest, close enough to catch the faint scent of cinnamon and gingerbread clinging to his sweater. "This isn't part of our arrangement." "Neither was negotiating with militant cookies," Logan pointed out softly. "But here we are." The mistletoe swayed overhead, its leaves rustling with impatience. The music switched to Kiss Me by sixpence none the richer. Really subtle, Jenna muttered, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing the plant, her grandmother, or her own traitorous heart, which had started beating double time the moment Logan's hands settled lightly on her waist to steady her. We could always wait it out, Logan suggested, though his voice had gone slightly husky. See if it starts taking requests. Jenna made the mistake of looking up at him then. The magical barrier cast dancing lights across his features, catching in his eyes and making them sparkle with something that seemed far too genuine for someone who was supposedly just playing a part. Her sweater hummed with warmth, and she could feel his doing the same where their bodies touched. Or, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to make the air itself hold its breath. One hand moved to brush a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. The magical barrier pulsed around them, casting prismatic shadows that danced across his features. We could. The Christmas tree lights dimmed to a soft glow, as if the house itself was trying to create the perfect moment. Even the usually chatty chess pieces had gone silent, watching with tiny wooden faces full of anticipation. The enchanted sweaters hummed in perfect harmony, their synchronized warmth creating a cocoon of comfort around them. Jenna felt her magic stirring, responding to his proximity in ways she couldn't quite control. Tiny sparks of golden light began dancing between them, like fireflies caught in amber. The mistletoe's barrier shimmered more intensely, its silver light catching in Logan's eyes and making them look almost otherworldly. Time seemed to slow, stretching like warm honey. Jenna could hear her heart thundering in her ears, feel the way her magic reached for his like ivy seeking sunlight. The space between them felt charged with possibility, crackling with an energy that had nothing to do with enchanted plants and everything to do with the way Logan was looking at her. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Betty interrupted, her ghostly wooden spoon tapping impatiently against her palm. Her voice broke through the moment like a bell through fog, though the magical tension remained. "Just kiss the boy, dear, before the mistletoe starts writing sonnets." The plant bobbed in agreement, and the barrier contracted another inch. "Fine," Jenna breathed, her hands fisting in Logan's sweater. "Fine, one kiss, just to break the spell." Logan's smile was soft, almost tender. "Just to break the spell," he agreed, though something in his tone suggested he didn't quite believe that any more than she did. The mistletoe chimed like tiny bells as they leaned closer, and Jenna's last coherent thought was that her grandmother looked entirely too pleased with herself. As if sensing Jenna's surrender, the mistletoe began dropping tiny golden sparks that floated down like magical confetti, each one dissolving in a warm shimmer when it touched their skin. Her sweater, that traitorous piece of knitwear, tightened encouragingly around her waist, drawing her even closer to Logan's chest. "Just remember to breathe," Logan murmured, his thumb tracing a gentle arc along her jawline. The touch sent tingles of awareness through her skin, and somewhere deep inside, Jenna felt something stir, a warm, electric sensation she'd spent years trying to suppress. The Christmas tree lights began to pulse softly, matching the rhythm of her quickening heartbeat. Jenna tried to blame it on Betty's ghostly interference, but she knew better. This was all her dormant magic responding to Logan's proximity like a flower turning toward the sun. "I know how to breathe," she managed, though the words came out embarrassingly breathy. "I've been doing it for years." Logan's quiet laugh brushed against her lips as he finally closed the distance between them. It was meant to be quick, just enough to satisfy the mistletoe's demands. A simple press of lips, a technical fulfillment of magical obligation, and then they could go back to their carefully constructed pretense. The mistletoe, however, had other plans. As their lips met, the barrier solidified, holding them in place as something electric sparked between them. Logan's mouth was warm, tasting of cinnamon and possibility, and Jenna felt her carefully maintained control crumbling. The kiss deepened, became real, and with it, the dam holding back her magic finally broke. Power surged through her veins like champagne bubbles, filling the room with cascading waves of magical energy. The Christmas lights exploded into a strobing rainbow, each bulb cycling through colors faster than the eye could track. Ornaments spun on their branches, catching the light and throwing it back in dazzling patterns that transformed the living room into an impromptu disco. The radio clicked on of its own accord, filling the air with "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," though the version seemed to have spontaneously remixed itself with a distinctly more romantic beat. Logan didn't pull away. Instead, his hands slid into her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss further. He seemed completely unfazed by the magical chaos erupting around them, as if kissing while surrounded by a Yuletide rave was perfectly normal. Then again, Jenna thought hazily, maybe for a ghost whisperer it was. Betty, looking absolutely delighted, raised her spectral wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. The tinsel responded immediately, peeling itself from the walls and dancing through the air in elaborate spirals. "That's it, dear," she called out encouragingly. "Let it all out." Jenna might have been mortified by her grandmother's cheerleading if she wasn't so thoroughly distracted by the way Logan's sweater was humming against hers, creating a harmony that seemed to vibrate through her entire body. Her own magic responded with another pulse, sending a wave of sparkles cascading down the walls like indoor shooting stars. When they finally broke apart, more from necessity than desire, the room had transformed into a festive wonderland gone slightly sideways. Every decoration pulsed in perfect synchronization with Jenna's thundering heartbeat, creating a light show that would put Times Square to shame. The gingerbread army had emerged from the kitchen to waltz with the tinsel, and the star on top of the Christmas tree was spinning like a disco ball. Jenna stumbled backward, her face burning as the reality of what just happened crashed over her. Years of carefully suppressed magic undone by one kiss. One very public, very magical, very real kiss that was supposed to be fake. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the heat there, as her eyes darted around the transformed room. Logan straightened his sweater, which was still glowing like a beacon, and ran a hand through his thoroughly mussed hair. His lips curved into a smile that was equal parts amused and impressed. "You might want to work on controlling those powers," he said, voice rough. "Though I have to say, as magical displays go, this is definitely one of the more festive ones I've seen." The glare Jenna shot him was potent enough to make the Christmas tree flip upside down, ornaments dangling precariously but somehow staying attached. The gingerbread soldiers immediately rushed to attention beneath it, forming a protective barrier against falling decorations. "I had them under perfect control," she said through gritted teeth, "until you and your... My what?" Logan's eyes danced with challenge. "My devastating kissing skills? My charming personality? My natural ability to bring out the magic in others?" The tree righted itself with a whoosh, nearly taking out the gingerbread guard in the process. "Your professional interference," Jenna finished, though the words lacked real heat. It was hard to maintain proper indignation when the tinsel was still swaying dreamily overhead and her lips were tingling with remembered pressure. Ah, yes, because making Christmas trees do gymnastics was definitely part of the original plan. Logan reached out and caught a still falling golden spark, letting it dissolve against his palm. "Face it, Matthews, there's nothing professional about what just happened." Betty, who had been conducting the tinsel in what appeared to be a rendition of the Nutcracker Suite, paused long enough to add, "He's right, dear. That kiss had about as much professionalism as your great-aunt Mildred's secret eggnog recipe." Chapter 6. Secrets in the Attic. Jenna trudged up the attic stairs, each ancient step creaking beneath her feet, as if personally offending the house's magical sensibilities. Behind her, Logan followed with far more enthusiasm than anyone should show for exploring a dusty attic. Then again, he probably didn't have a meddling ghost grandmother floating ahead of them, wielding her spectral wooden spoon like a tour guide's flag. Strings of fairy lights flickered to life along the walls, creating a twinkling path that definitely hadn't been there this morning. "Just old Christmas decorations," Jenna muttered, more to herself than Logan. "Perfectly normal wiring issues." "Right," Logan drawled, "because all old wiring creates perfect heart patterns in the air." The lights, traitors that they were, had indeed arranged themselves into a series of floating hearts. Betty beamed at her handiwork while gesturing them forward with increased urgency. The attic door swung open without either of them touching it, releasing a wave of warm air that smelled like cinnamon and old books. Logan's eyes widened as they stepped inside, and Jenna could practically feel him cataloging the magical energy radiating from every corner. Trunks of enchanted heirlooms, shelves of crystals that still held a faint glow, and oh no. The family spellbook was already inching its way toward the edge of its shelf, its ancient leather binding practically vibrating with eagerness. Jenna deliberately turned her back on it, focusing instead on a perfectly normal stack of boxes. So, this is the attic. Very dusty. Time to go. Are you kidding? Logan wandered deeper into the space, trailing his fingers along a shelf of crystal balls that immediately lit up like Christmas ornaments. This place is incredible. The magical resonance alone. A wooden wand that had belonged to Jenna's great aunt Mildred chose that moment to shoot a stream of silver sparks across the room. Logan ducked, grinning, as more objects began responding to his presence. Your family's power must go back generations. We just have a hoarding problem, Jenna insisted, but her words were drowned out by the sudden whirlwind of photographs that Betty had conjured in the center of the room. They spun in lazy circles, each one prominently featuring a teenage Jenna in various stages of magical practice. There she was at 15, levitating cookies. At 16, charming flowers to bloom in winter. At 17, Jenna lunged forward, snatching the photos out of the air before that particular memory could surface. Grandma, enough! What's wrong with looking at old photos? Logan picked up an ornate music box from a nearby table. And because the universe clearly hated her, it immediately began playing a romantic melody. Everyone goes through an awkward phase. The music triggered a chain reaction. More crystal balls illuminated, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. A collection of antique wands sent up a shower of sparks that formed themselves into dancing couples. Even the old mirror in the corner began to fog up with magical residue. This isn't about bad haircuts, Jenna said, struggling to stuff the photos into her pocket while simultaneously trying to prevent a enchanted tea set from launching into a full musical number. It's about... A loud thump cut her off. The family spellbook had finally achieved its goal, launching itself off the shelf to land dramatically at her feet. Its pages began turning of their own accord, releasing puffs of glitter with each flip, until it settled on a specific page marked with Betty's familiar looping handwriting. Jenna's throat went dry. Of course, it would be that spell. Of course, Betty would make sure Logan saw exactly what had made her swear off magic all those years ago. Jenna? Logan's voice was gentle as he set down the still-playing music box. He must have noticed how she'd gone rigid, how her hands had curled into fists at her sides. What is it? A deck of divination cards chose that moment to burst from its velvet bag, swirling around them like anxious butterflies. Each card seemed determined to show its face to Logan. The Tower, the Lovers, Wheel of Fortune. But Jenna barely noticed them. Her eyes were locked on the spell that had changed everything, the one written in Betty's hand with so much hope and optimism. True Love's Light, Logan read from the page, and the cards fluttered faster. A spell to illuminate the path to one's soulmate. He looked up at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. This is why you stopped using magic, isn't it? The music box's melody swelled, and the fairy lights dimmed to cast them in a soft glow. Even Betty had gone quiet, her spectral form watching with unusual stillness as more divination cards escaped their confinement to join the swirling dance around them. It wasn't supposed to go wrong, Jenna said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I just wanted to know if Jason Mitchell really liked me back. Stupid teenage drama, right? Except when I cast it. She swallowed hard, watching as the cards continued their frantic pattern. Let's just say it did more than illuminate a path. The whole school dance went dark, except for this spotlight effect that followed Jason around for weeks, complete with romantic music whenever he moved. He had to transfer schools. That's... Logan paused, clearly trying not to smile. Actually kind of impressive, magically speaking, especially for a teenager. It was mortifying, Jenna corrected, though some of the tension had eased from her shoulders at his reaction. And it proved what I'd always suspected. I have too much power and not enough control. Better to just not use it at all. The cards suddenly gathered into a heart shape above the spellbook, and Betty's ghost made an encouraging gesture with her spoon. Logan stepped closer, close enough that their enchanted sweaters began to hum in harmony again. Or maybe, he said softly, you just needed the right reason to try again. Jenna stepped back from Logan's too understanding gaze, but her retreat was immediately thwarted. The enchanted sweater tightened around her middle, while a length of silver tinsel snaked down from the rafters, wrapping itself around her wrist like a glittering lasso. Before she could protest, the tinsel's other end had somehow attached itself to Logan's belt loop. Really? She glared at the ceiling, where Betty's ghost was failing to look innocent. This is getting ridiculous. Betty responded by illuminating a dusty corner of the attic with her spectral glow. There, on a shelf that definitely hadn't been visible a moment ago, sat a collection of Jenna's childhood achievements. A crystal trophy caught the light, its surface magically buffing itself to a brilliant shine. The engraving read, Most Promising Young Witch, Junior Division. You never mentioned you were a prodigy, Logan said, somehow managing to sound impressed rather than accusatory. The tinsel between them shortened itself by several inches, drawing them closer. I wasn't. Jenna tried tugging at the tinsel, but it only sparkled more intensely. I just had a knack for making things interesting. As if on cue, Betty's ghostly spotlight shifted to illuminate another shelf, this one displaying ribbons from magical science fairs and what appeared to be a certificate for most creative use of transformation magic in a school play. The latter quickly unrolled itself, revealing a photo of 13-year-old Jenna turning the entire cast of Romeo and Juliet into actual forest creatures. Logan's attention, however, had been caught by something else. He reached past her, the tinsel helpfully allowing this movement, and picked up a slender wand made of pale wood. The moment his fingers touched it, it erupted in a shower of golden sparks that formed themselves into tiny dancing figures. Cedar with a phoenix feather core, he noted, examining the still sparking wand. That's rare, and it's still responding after all these years of disuse? How do you even know that? Jenna demanded, trying to ignore how the wand's magic felt like a long-forgotten song she suddenly remembered the words to. Ghost Whisperer, remember? You pick up a few things about magical objects when half your clients are deceased witches worried about their family heirlooms. He turned the wand over, revealing elegant scrollwork along its handle. This was custom made. Someone really believed in your potential. That was it. The final straw. Jenna felt something snap inside her, like a rubber band stretched too far. Well, they were wrong. Her voice echoed through the attic, causing several reactions at once. The mirrors lining one wall fogged over instantly, their surfaces rippling like disturbed pools. Crystal balls dimmed, as if someone had thrown switches, and an old teddy bear in the corner, one she'd accidentally brought to life during a childhood bout of chicken pox, covered its eyes with its paws. They were all wrong, she continued, her words causing magical items to rattle on their shelves. I'm not some magical prodigy. I'm a disaster waiting to happen. Every time I tried to do something special, something important, it backfired spectacularly. So yes, I had potential to cause chaos, potential to ruin things, potential to... The spellbook chose that moment to zoom between them, nearly breaking their tinsel connection. It hovered at eye level, pages flipping rapidly before stopping on a section titled Embracing Your Magical Heritage, a Guide for the Reluctant Witch. Oh, come on, Jenna batted at the book, but it merely dodged and reopened to the same page. I don't need a self-help guide from a possessed book. The book responded by floating to another position and displaying a different chapter. Understanding Magical Surges, Why Power Isn't the Problem. I understand just fine, Jenna muttered, but the fight had drained from her voice. The book followed her as she moved toward the attic stairs, the tinsel stretching to accommodate her movement while still keeping her tethered to Logan. Logan started to follow, but something caught his eye. There, partially hidden behind a stack of old Witch Weekly magazines, was a photograph that seemed different from the others. It showed a younger Jenna, maybe 17, standing in what looked like the aftermath of a magical explosion. But it wasn't the scorch marks or the still smoking cauldron that drew his attention. It was her expression. She looked devastated, not embarrassed or frustrated, but genuinely heartbroken. When he glanced up, Betty's ghost was watching him with an unnervingly knowing look. She pointed first to the photo, then to her granddaughter's retreating back, then made a gesture that clearly meant there was more to the story. Much more. The spellbook, still trailing Jenna like a persistent puppy, flipped to yet another page. Healing past magical trauma, a path forward. I said enough. Jenna spun around, but her eyes caught on the photograph in Logan's hands. All the color drained from her face as another photo slipped from behind the first one. The photograph trembled violently in Jenna's hands. Her and Sarah at 16, matching charm bracelets glinting in the afternoon sun as they practiced healing spells on wilted flowers. Sarah's face was already thin then, her complexion too pale, dark circles shadowing her eyes. But Jenna had been too caught up in their magical achievements to notice the warning signs. The memory of Sarah's determined smile, so brave even then, made Jenna's chest ache with a familiar guilt. I can't. Jenna's voice caught as the photograph's edges began to frost over, responding to her surging emotions. I can't do this right now. She thrust the photo back at Logan, but her magic had already left its mark. Delicate ice crystals spreading across the image like frozen tears. The spellbook's pages rustled with what might have been sympathy, but Jenna was already turning away, her charm bracelet cold against her wrist. The addict's collected magical items seemed to dim as she passed, sensing her distress. Even the enchanted music box that had been playing softly in the corner fell silent, its melody trailing off like an unfinished sentence. But as she stormed down the creaking attic stairs, her footsteps echoing against the worn wood, the book tucked itself decisively under Logan's arm with an almost protective air, and Betty's ghost gave him a look that clearly said, "Don't give up just yet." Her silvery form flickered with determination as she gestured emphatically at her retreating granddaughter. The dusty trophy on the shelf gave itself one final, thorough polish, catching the late afternoon light in a way that seemed almost hopeful, its golden surface gleaming with possibility. Chapter 7: Grandma's Games. Jenna trudged down the stairs with Logan following close behind, only to find her mother arranging throw pillows in the living room with suspicious enthusiasm. The coffee table had been cleared except for a familiar blue box that made Jenna's stomach drop. "Game night," Mrs. Matthews announced, her holiday sweater twinkling with actual stars. "I thought we could all play Pictionary." "Mom, no." But Jenna's protest died as Betty's ghost zipped past her, wielding what looked suspiciously like a stack of cards that definitely hadn't come with the original game. "Oh, these will be perfect." Mrs. Matthews plucked the cards from thin air, apparently not questioning their mysterious appearance, and began shuffling them with practiced efficiency. Jenna edged closer to the table, trying to appear casual as she reached for the deck. "Maybe we should use the regular cards. Keep things normal." The cards scattered away from her fingers like startled birds, reorganizing themselves in a neat pile at the opposite end of the table. She lunged for them again, but they merely skittered further away, leaving tiny trails of sparkles in their wake. Logan settled onto the love seat, watching her increasingly desperate attempts to corral the wayward cards with poorly concealed amusement. "Everything okay over there?" "Fine," Jenna gritted out, making another grab. "These cards just seem a bit jumpy tonight." "Time to pick teams." Mrs. Matthews clapped her hands, and before Jenna could escape, her enchanted sweater yanked her backward with surprising force. She landed next to Logan on the love seat with an undignified oof. "I'll just move to ooh." But as she tried to scoot away, both their sweaters constricted, pulling them closer together until their shoulders touched. Each subsequent wiggle only resulted in the sweaters tightening their knit grip. "Cozy," Logan murmured, and Jenna could have sworn she heard Betty's ghostly giggle from somewhere behind them. Mrs. Matthews beamed at them. "Oh, you two make such a perfect team. Now, who wants to go first?" The marker lifted itself from the table and floated toward Jenna with unmistakable purpose. "No," she whispered. "Absolutely not." The marker bobbed insistently in front of her face, while Betty's ghost made encouraging shooing motions toward the easel. "Fine." Jenna snatched the marker from the air and stomped to the drawing board. She drew a card, or rather, a card flew into her hand, and she barely had time to read Enchanted Garden before the marker began moving of its own accord. "I can draw by myself," she hissed, but Betty's invisible hand guided hers across the paper. Elaborate vines sprouted from her marker strokes, blooming into glowing flowers that actually sparkled on the page. A miniature fountain appeared in the corner, complete with tiny animated water droplets. "Enchanted Garden," Logan called out immediately, earning a shower of silver sparkles from above as Betty expressed her approval. "Lucky guess," Jenna muttered, but the Christmas ornaments apparently disagreed. They detached themselves from the tree and began a celebratory dance around Logan's head, tinkling like tiny bells. The next hour proceeded in similar fashion. Every time Jenna drew, Betty's ghostly assistants turned simple sketches into magical masterpieces. A basic broom became a detailed racing broomstick with actual motion lines. A hat transformed into an elaborate witch's cap that shot tiny stars across the paper. And Logan, infuriatingly, guessed every single one. "Wizard's chess," he called out as Betty guided Jenna's hand to create miniature chess pieces that actually fought each other on the paper. "Magical mistletoe," as the drawing burst into tiny hearts. "Phoenix rising," as the marker traced a bird that seemed to glow from within. The ornaments had given up returning to the tree and now performed increasingly complex choreography with each correct answer. Even the garland had joined in, swaying like a charmed snake to some unheard holiday tune. When they switched to charades, things only got worse. The row of decorative nutcrackers on the mantel suddenly sprang to life, marching forward to assist, or more accurately, upstage each performer. Jenna drew ice skating and had barely begun her mime when 3 nutcrackers slid across the coffee table in perfect formation, their wooden arms raised in elegant poses. A 4th performed a dramatic triple axel that sent it spinning right into the cookie plate. Logan doubled over laughing as 2 more nutcrackers attempted a lift that ended with both of them toppling into the stockings. "I don't know what's better, your face or their commitment to the performance." "At least someone's enjoying this," Jenna grumbled, but she couldn't quite suppress her own smile as a particularly enthusiastic nutcracker attempted a swan dive into the popcorn bowl. The sweaters chose that moment to contract again, eliminating what little space remained between her and Logan. She could feel the warmth of his leg pressed against hers, smell the faint trace of coffee and winter air that clung to his clothes. It was distracting. "Your turn," she managed, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. Logan stood and drew a card, then grinned at whatever he saw written there. He'd barely struck his first pose when the nutcrackers assembled themselves into a kick line, complete with tiny top hats that definitely hadn't been part of their original costumes. "Oh, good." Jenna deadpanned as the wooden dancers launched into what appeared to be a full Broadway routine. They've got backup dancers now. But watching Logan try to maintain his composure as the nutcrackers added increasingly dramatic flourishes to his every movement, including one that insisted on doing jazz hands after each gesture, made it impossible to stay annoyed. His shoulders shook with suppressed laughter as a particularly ambitious nutcracker attempted a pirouette and crashed into its fellows, creating a domino effect of falling wooden soldiers. "Radio City Rockettes," Jenna called out, surprising herself with her own enthusiasm. The remaining upright nutcrackers burst into silent applause, while Betty's ghost conducted their bows with her spectral wooden spoon. Even the Christmas lights seemed to twinkle more brightly in celebration. "Not quite," Logan managed between laughs, "but I'm starting to think the actual answer doesn't matter anymore." As if to prove his point, the fallen nutcrackers picked themselves up and began an encore performance, this time with the tree tinsel joining in as impromptu chorus line scarves. "Maybe we should try something less." Jenna searched for the right word as the nutcrackers took their final bow. "Theatrical?" The Scrabble board came sliding across the coffee table of its own accord, tiles rattling inside their velvet bag. Jenna shot a suspicious look at the spot where Betty's ghost hovered, but it was too late. The bag upended itself, and tiles began arranging themselves on the board with deliberate precision. "Soulmates. "Oh, look, your grandmother's joining us," Logan said, far too cheerfully for someone watching possessed Scrabble tiles. "And she's starting with a triple word score." Jenna sank deeper into the love seat, wishing the enchanted sweater would swallow her whole. We don't have to play this. The tiles shuffled again. Destiny? Actually, I think we do, Logan grinned as more tiles floated up. Your grandmother's on quite a roll. Behind them, the Christmas tree rustled ominously. Jenna turned just in time to see several ornaments detach themselves, rolling across their branches until they formed neat rows. Tiny strands of tinsel separated from the garland, twisting themselves into miniature pom-poms. No, Jenna groaned. Absolutely not. But the ornament cheerleading squad had other ideas. As Logan placed his first word on the board, charm, they burst into a synchronized routine, complete with aerial stunts as smaller ornaments were tossed into perfect formations. Give me a L, the ornaments seemed to chime, their bells tinkling in harmony. Give me an O. I'm getting quite the welcome committee, Logan laughed, watching a particularly ambitious bauble attempt a backflip. They're not usually this. Jenna waved her hand at the increasingly elaborate choreography, coordinated. A new commotion from the hallway drew their attention. The family's enchanted chess set came marching in, the pieces moving in formation like a tiny army. The White Queen, ever dramatic, was wearing what appeared to be a hastily fashioned toga made from a cocktail napkin. We heard there were games afoot, the Queen announced in a voice like tinkling crystal. Though I must say, charades hardly seems dignified enough for pieces of our caliber. Says the Queen wearing a napkin, muttered a black pawn, earning himself a royal glare. Now see here, a white bishop cut in. If we're to participate, we must establish proper rules of engagement. No hints from the audience, no excessive prop usage, and absolutely no help from the ghost. Betty's spectral wooden spoon tapped the bishop reproachfully. I don't recall inviting any of you, Jenna pointed out, but the chess pieces had already begun arranging themselves on the coffee table, the pawns serving as a judging committee. Logan, naturally, took it all in stride. When his turn for charades came around, he incorporated the floating ornaments into an elaborate mime of Singing in the Rain, using a particularly round bauble as an umbrella, while the cheerleading squad provided backup dancing. This is ridiculous, Jenna declared as the chess pieces gave him a standing ovation, but she couldn't help noticing how the sweater had stopped trying to strangle her, settling instead into a comfortable warmth as Logan dropped back onto the love seat beside her. Your turn, he said, eyes twinkling with mischief. Though I don't know how you'll top my performance. The ornaments really sold that rain sequence. The cheerleading squad preened, their bells chiming proudly. Jenna drew a card, then had to bite back a laugh. Of course. A Christmas carol. She'd barely begun her first gesture when the chess pieces sprang into action, the White King donning a tiny chain made of paper clips while moaning dramatically. The pawns arranged themselves into a chorus line, swaying as they hummed what might have been meant to be God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, but sounded more like a cat walking across piano keys. I can do this myself, Jenna protested, but she was fighting a losing battle against her own amusement. Logan's running commentary on the chess piece's interpretive dance of Scrooge's redemption wasn't helping. Is that pawn doing the worm? He asked as one piece executed a questionable dance move. The laughter bubbled up before she could stop it, bright and genuine. Suddenly, every game piece in the room lifted into the air, spinning in delighted circles. The Scrabble tiles performed an elaborate square dance, while the chess pieces waltzed with the ornaments. Even the nutcrackers returned for an encore, sliding across the coffee table in perfect synchronization. I didn't mean to, Jenna started, but Logan's arm slipped around her shoulders, warm and steady. Let them have their fun, he said softly. Besides, I think we're about to get a show. Sure enough, the magical decorations were rearranging themselves into what appeared to be a stage setup. The chess pieces took center stage, while Betty's ghost raised her spoon like a conductor's baton. The ornament cheerleaders transformed their pom-poms into tiny scripts, and the nutcrackers positioned themselves as stagehands. 'Twas the night before Christmas, the White Queen began grandly, still wearing her cocktail napkin toga, when all through the house. The Black Knights created a miniature roof using coasters, while pawns scurried beneath, playing the roles of sleeping children. The rooks transformed themselves into chimneys, complete with tissue paper smoke. Not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse, continued the queen, as a bishop wearing a mouse ear headband. Where had that come from? Tiptoed exaggeratedly across the coffee table. Jenna found herself relaxing into Logan's embrace as the performance continued, each piece throwing themselves into their roles with theatrical abandon. The ornament cheerleaders provided sound effects, from jingling bells to what was possibly supposed to be reindeer hooves, but sounded more like dropping marbles. When Santa appeared, the White King now sporting a cotton ball beard and a red paper hat, the Nutcrackers created a miniature sleigh from a tissue box, while the Scrabble tile spelled out "Ho, ho, ho" in midair. You know, Logan whispered as they watched Santa's dramatic entrance down the tissue paper chimney, for a fake date, this is turning out to be one of the most entertaining evenings I've had in a while. Jenna turned to reply, but the words caught in her throat. Logan was looking at her with an expression that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. The enchanted sweater hummed with warmth, and somewhere above them, Betty's ghost was probably beaming. The magical performance continued, blissfully unaware of the moment passing between its audience members. Or perhaps very aware, given the way the ornament cheerleaders kept shooting knowing looks in their direction between scene changes. Chapter 8: The Snowstorm Within. The magical performance had barely finished its final bow when Mrs. Matthews appeared in the doorway, clutching the family spellbook to her chest like a shield. The ornaments scattered, sensing the shift in atmosphere, while the chess pieces made a strategic retreat behind the tissue box sleigh. "Jenna, sweetheart," her mother began, and Jenna immediately tensed at the too sweet tone. "I found something interesting while cleaning the study." She held up the leather-bound book, its pages shimming with an eager light that made Jenna's stomach clench. "Mom, please, not now." Jenna stood, putting distance between herself and Logan, who was watching the exchange with poorly concealed interest. "If not now, then when?" Mrs. Matthews settled into her favorite armchair, the spellbook falling open to a marked page. "You haven't touched magic since." The first snowflake drifted down between them, landing on the open page with a soft sparkle. Jenna watched it melt, leaving a tiny watermark on the ancient paper, and fought to keep her breathing steady. "I'm handling things just fine," Jenna said, wrapping her arms around herself. The enchanted sweater pulsed warmly, trying to comfort her, but she ignored it. Another snowflake joined the first, then another, creating a gentle curtain around the Christmas tree. "Handling things? Is that what you call suppressing your gift?" Her mother's voice carried that familiar note of disappointment that always made Jenna feel about 10 years old. "You were meant for so much more than what?" Jenna cut in. "Than running a successful business, than living a normal life without magical chaos following me everywhere." Logan chose that moment to enter from the kitchen, a mug of what smelled like peppermint hot chocolate in his hands. He froze mid-step as Mrs. Matthews said, "You can't keep running from the incident forever." The snow picked up instantly, no longer gentle, but sharp and insistent. It dusted the furniture in white, coating the chess pieces until they looked like tiny snowmen. The spellbook's pages began to turn on their own, faster and faster, golden light spilling from between the sheets. "I'm not running from anything," Jenna said, but her voice shook. The sweater tightened around her shoulders, its cheerful pattern now pulsing with an anxious rhythm. "I made my choice." "You made a choice based on fear," her mother pressed, brushing snow from the spellbook's pages. "Do you know how many Matthews witches would have given anything for your level of talent? The potential you're wasting." "Wasting?" The word exploded from Jenna in a burst of Arctic air. Snow began to swirl around her in a vortex, picking up speed with each rotation. "Because I don't want to end up like..." She cut herself off, but the damage was done. The chandelier above them crackled as icicles formed along its crystal arms, growing longer by the second. The temperature plummeted so quickly that the windows frosted over, delicate patterns spreading across the glass like frozen lace. Grandma Betty materialized between them, her spectral form slightly obscured by the swirling snow. "Now, ladies," she began, wielding her wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. "Perhaps we should." "Not now, Mother," Mrs. Matthews said. At the same time, Jenna snapped, "Stay out of it, Grandma!" Betty's presence only amplified the chaos in Jenna's chest. 3 generations of Matthews witches, all with their expectations and traditions and disappointed looks. The snow responded to her rising panic, transforming into a proper blizzard that confined itself to the living room. Wind howled through the space, making the Christmas tree shudder, and the ornaments dance wildly on their branches. Jenna, Logan's voice cut through the storm as he stepped between her and her mother. Snow collected in his hair, making him look like he'd been caught in a real winter storm. "Hey, look at me." But Jenna could barely see him through the whiteout conditions she'd created. The enchanted sweater squeezed tighter, as if trying to contain the magic that was pouring out of her. Tinsel whipped through the air like silver snakes, and somewhere in the chaos, she heard the chess pieces calling for reinforcements. The wind picked up speed, howling loud enough to drown out whatever Logan was trying to say. Christmas cards flew from their display on the mantel, caught in the circular current of the storm. The nutcrackers huddled together beneath the coffee table, their tiny wooden teeth chattering in the cold. "You don't understand," Jenna tried to explain, but her words were lost in the gale. The blizzard intensified, responding to years of buried feelings that were finally breaking free. "None of you understand." The spellbook's pages continued their frenzied dance, golden light mixing with the snow to create an aurora-like effect in the living room. Mrs. Matthews clutched the book tighter, her expression a mixture of concern and determination that Jenna knew all too well. "Sweetheart," her mother started again, but Logan held up a hand to stop her. He turned back to Jenna, snow swirling around him like a cloak. The enchanted sweater's pattern had aligned with his, both garments now glowing with a steady, warm light that stood out against the winter chaos. He took a step toward her, then another, fighting against the wind that tried to push him back. "Whatever happened," he said, his voice somehow carrying through the storm, "whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone." The chess pieces, now thoroughly snow-covered, began humming what might have been meant to be a calming melody. It came out more like a winter wind through bare branches, but their hearts were in the right place. Mrs. Matthews retreated to the kitchen, her slippers leaving crystalline footprints that sparkled in the chaos of Jenna's magical storm. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click that was nearly lost in the howling wind. Logan stood his ground in the swirling snow, his presence steady despite the chaos. The matching sweaters pulsed with warmth, creating a small sphere of calm in the otherwise frenzied room. Tiny drifts had begun forming around the furniture, giving the living room the appearance of a snow globe gone rogue. "You know," Logan said, his voice cutting through the wind with surprising clarity, "the first time I saw a ghost, I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating from too much coffee." He took another careful step toward Jenna, snow crunching beneath his feet. Spent 3 weeks avoiding every Starbucks in a 10-mile radius. The wind's intensity flickered, just slightly. Jenna's eyes fixed on him, skepticism warring with curiosity on her face. Then I started seeing them everywhere. Movie theaters, grocery stores, the DMV. Though to be fair, everyone looks like a ghost at the DMV. He brushed some snow from his hair, a small smile playing at his lips. I thought I was losing my mind. Started carrying around this ridiculous notebook, documenting everything to prove I wasn't crazy. The snow began to slow, individual flakes becoming visible instead of the solid white wall that had surrounded them moments before. The chess pieces, who had been building a snow fort under the coffee table, "There was this one ghost," Logan continued, now close enough that Jenna could see the snowflakes caught in his eyelashes. "Eleanor. She haunted the public library where I worked, kept reorganizing the romance section according to quality of kissing scenes." He chuckled, but there was an edge of old pain in it. "I ignored her for weeks, pretended I couldn't see her shelving books at midnight or leaving post-it note reviews on paperbacks." Jenna's storm calmed further, the howling wind softening to a whisper. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "She followed me home one day, told me she couldn't move on until someone helped her find her long-lost love letters, hidden somewhere in the library's archives." Logan's sweater glowed brighter, synchronized with Jenna's. "I was so scared of acknowledging what I could do that I almost let her spend eternity searching alone." The remaining snow swirled lazily around them now, like autumn leaves in a gentle breeze. The spellbook's pages had stopped their frantic turning, settling on a page that emitted a soft, golden light. "I finally helped her," Logan said softly. "Found the letters in an old card catalog drawer. Turns out her great-granddaughter volunteered at the library. Eleanor just wanted her to know she was loved, that she came from a family of romantics." He paused, snowflakes dancing between them. "Sometimes the gifts we're afraid of are exactly what someone else needs." Jenna's breath hitched, and the snow responded, individual flakes freezing in place. They hung suspended in the air, catching the Christmas lights and transforming the room into a crystalline wonderland. Logan reached for her hand, his touch gentle but grounding. The moment their fingers connected, the frozen flakes began to sparkle more intensely, refracting rainbow light across the snow-dusted furniture. The chess pieces abandoned their fort building to stare in wonder, their tiny wooden faces reflecting the magical display. "Oh, isn't this romantic?" Grandma Betty's ghost materialized nearby, her spectral wooden spoon conducting the suspended snowflakes into heart shapes. "Just like that Valentine's Day blizzard of '62 when your grandfather." Jenna rolled her eyes, but there was more fondness than frustration in the gesture. The movement sent an unexpected ripple of magic through the room, transforming the floating snowflakes into delicate ice butterflies. They hovered in place, wings catching the light like stained glass. "Show off," Logan teased, but his hand remained wrapped around hers, warm despite the winter wonderland surrounding them. The butterflies drifted in lazy circles, their crystalline wings chiming softly against each other. One landed on their joined hands, its wings spreading to reveal patterns that matched their sweater's synchronized glow. The nutcrackers emerged from their hiding spot to march through the fallen snow, leaving tiny boot prints in their wake. "I didn't mean to," Jenna whispered, watching the ice butterfly flex its delicate wings. "They just happened." "Sometimes the best magic does," Logan said, using his free hand to catch a stray butterfly that had been investigating his hair. "Like enchanted sweaters and living gingerbread men. And fake boyfriends who talk to ghosts." The words slipped out before Jenna could stop them, half teasing and half something else entirely. Before Logan could respond, Grandma Betty had managed to arrange several ice butterflies into a floating heart above their heads. "Now that's what I call a Christmas miracle," she declared, looking entirely too pleased with herself. The chess pieces, not to be outdone, began humming "Let It Snow" from their snow fort, their tinny voices echoing in the transformed living room. A few brave pawns ventured out to attempt ice skating across the coffee table, using fallen tinsel as scarves. Logan's thumb traced small circles on Jenna's palm, and she noticed the storm inside her chest had finally quieted. The room remained winter-touched, snowdrifts piled in corners, ice butterflies dancing through the air, frost patterns decorating the windows. But the chaos had transformed into something almost beautiful. Their sweaters continued their synchronized light show, casting warm patterns across the snow that looked suspiciously like more hearts, though Jenna couldn't tell if that was Grandma Betty's doing or the sweater's own romantic inclinations. Either way, she found she didn't mind quite as much as she should have. Chapter 9. Mistletoe Mischief Strikes Again. Jenna crept down the darkened stairs, her fuzzy socks muffling each step. After the emotional snowstorm earlier, she desperately needed some of her mom's magical hot chocolate, the kind that somehow always knew exactly which comfort flavors to swirl into existence. The living room still sparkled with frost, ice butterflies dozing on lampshades and windowsills. "Couldn't sleep either?" She jumped at Logan's voice, nearly missing the last step. He stood in the hallway, looking unfairly put together in his Christmas sweater despite the late hour. Before she could answer, a rustling sound drew her attention upward. Green leaves and white berries sprouted from nowhere, weaving themselves into an elaborate arch directly above them. "Oh, come on," Jenna muttered, backing away. But as she turned toward the kitchen, another sprig of mistletoe burst into existence over that doorway, and the living room entrance, and the path to the study. Each new plant glowed with a soft, silvery light that definitely hadn't been part of their previous magical makeup. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Your grandmother's getting creative." This isn't funny anymore, Grandma, Jenna called out. But the mistletoe only grew more elaborate, its vines stretching across the ceiling to connect all the doorways in an intricate lattice of leaves and berries. The magical plants pulsed with light, creating a maze of illuminated archways that left them corralled in the foyer. I'd say she's made her point rather clear, Logan said, gesturing to their increasingly limited escape routes. The mistletoe responded by dropping a few strategically placed berries that bounced off his head. I think we're being herded, Jenna observed, watching as the vines grew thicker around the outer doorways, leaving only the space directly between them, clear of obstruction. Their sweaters began to glow in that telling synchronized pattern again, and Jenna felt the fabric tighten slightly, urging her toward Logan. The Christmas lights dimmed dramatically, and Grandma Betty materialized with all the theatricality of a Broadway diva making her entrance. Her usually transparent form appeared almost solid, and she wielded her spectral wooden spoon like a conductor's baton. The family spellbook floated beside her, its ancient leather cover gleaming in the mistletoe's ethereal light. Elizabeth Matthews, Jenna started, using her grandmother's full name. What are you? Hush, dear. Betty waved her spoon, and the spellbook drifted between them, its pages ruffling until they settled on what looked like one of the oldest entries. It's time you knew the truth. About why you're forcing us to play magical mistletoe maze? Jenna tried to step away, but her sweater contracted, keeping her firmly in place. About why I chose Logan, Betty said, her voice carrying unusual weight. The Christmas lights dimmed further until only the mistletoe's glow and their synchronized sweaters illuminated the space. About why I've been orchestrating this whole evening. The spellbook's pages emanated a soft golden light, illuminating text that seemed to shift and dance across the parchment. Ancient ink swirled into focus, forming words in an elegant script that definitely hadn't been there before. You chose Logan? Jenna's voice caught as the implications sank in. She turned to him. Wait, this wasn't a random booking? Logan shook his head, looking as surprised as she felt. My assistant just said there was a special request, something about a client specifically asking for someone with my particular talents. I've been watching you for months, Betty admitted, directing her words to Logan. The way you help lost spirits, how you guide them with such patience and understanding. I saw you with that little ghost girl at the park, helping her find her mother just to say goodbye, and the elderly spirit at the hospital who needed someone to water his wife's roses one last time. Jenna's sweater warmed against her skin as Betty spoke, its light pulsing in perfect rhythm with Logan's. The mistletoe above them seemed to lean closer, its silver glow intensifying. But why? Jenna asked, though part of her feared she already knew the answer. Betty gestured to the spellbook, and the golden script brightened. There's an old prophecy in our family line about a witch who would lose her way, whose power would lie dormant until... She paused for dramatic effect as the Christmas lights flickered, until love showed her the path back to herself. Grandma? Jenna groaned, but her sweater tightened again, preventing her from turning away from the floating book. The ancient words seemed to reach out to her, each letter shimmering with meaning she couldn't quite ignore. I knew it had to be someone special, Betty continued, her ghost becoming even more solid as she spoke. Someone who understood both the magical and mundane worlds. Someone who could see past those walls you've built and recognize the power you've hidden away. She pointed her spoon at Logan. Someone who knows what it's like to have a gift you never asked for. The mistletoe chimed softly, its berries glowing like tiny stars. Jenna felt Logan shift beside her, their sweaters light creating a warm cocoon around them. That's why the bookings kept mysteriously canceling whenever someone else tried to hire me for Christmas Eve, Logan said, realization dawning in his voice. And why my car broke down right in front of that magical coffee shop where we met. Betty looked entirely too pleased with herself. The universe works in mysterious ways, dear. Sometimes it just needs a little nudge. She twirled her spoon, and the spellbook's pages turned to reveal more of the prophecy, the words arranging themselves into clear view. Their sweaters' glow intensified, creating patterns that matched the ancient text perfectly. Jenna couldn't help but notice how the light caught the green in Logan's eyes, making them sparkle like the enchanted mistletoe above them. You orchestrated everything, Jenna said, pieces falling into place. The sweaters, the gingerbread rebellion, the snowstorm. She paused, remembering how natural it had felt to share that vulnerable moment with Logan, how easily he'd understood her fears about her magic. You've been playing matchmaker this whole time. Matchmaker, fairy godmother, concerned grandmother, call it what you will. Betty shrugged, her transparent shoulders somehow managing to look smug. But you can't deny the connection. Your magic knows it, your sweaters know it, and judging by those ice butterflies still floating around, your heart knows it too. As if on cue, one of the crystalline butterflies from earlier drifted down to land on the spellbook's open pages, its wings casting rainbow prisms across the prophecy's golden text. The mistletoe hummed in harmony with their sweaters, creating a symphony of magical energy that made Jenna's suppressed power stir in response. Jenna felt her anger rise like a tide, crackling through her veins and making the mistletoe arch above them spark dangerously. The magical energy pulsed in sync with her racing heartbeat, sending tiny jolts of electricity through the air. Logan, infuriatingly, remained steady beside her, as if this revelation was merely confirming something he'd suspected all along. You know what the worst part is? Jenna's voice trembled. I actually started to believe this was real. Betty's ghost twirled her wooden spoon, and suddenly the air around them filled with shimmering projections. Like a supernatural highlight reel, scenes played out in ghostly light. The gingerbread cookies, marching in formation, mysteriously choosing that exact moment to revolt. The sweater's threads being woven with intention, Betty's spectral hands guiding each stitch. Even the chess pieces had been carefully enchanted weeks in advance. I orchestrated the situations, Betty admitted, but I couldn't fabricate the connection between you two. That was all your own magic recognizing its match. The projection shifted to show Logan and Jenna during the snowstorm, their sweaters glowing in perfect harmony as ice butterflies danced around them. The real mistletoe above them hummed in response, its silver light intensifying. She's right about that part, Logan said softly. His hand moved toward hers but stopped short. The circumstances might have been arranged, but everything we felt, was genuine. Jenna's magic surged defensively, making the mistletoe explode in a shower of silver sparks that rained down around them like stellar debris. Don't, she warned, taking a step back. You knew. This whole time, you knew this wasn't just some regular booking. I knew something was different, Logan admitted, running a hand through his hair. But I didn't know the extent until what? Until you saw how pathetically I'd locked away my magic? Until my ghost grandmother revealed her master plan? The family photos on the walls began to rattle in their frames, and the Christmas garland drooped as if sharing her distress. You both manipulated me, used my family's dinner as some kind of magical intervention. Jenna, sweetheart? Betty floated closer, her form flickering with concern. We were trying to help. After what happened with Sarah, don't. Jenna's voice cracked like ice. Don't you dare bring that up. But you need to know the truth. Betty's ghost became more solid, more urgent. What happened that day wasn't your fault. Sarah's accident. It wasn't a magical failure at all. She was already... I said stop. Jenna whirled around, her magic instinctively pushing through the mistletoe's barrier. The enchanted plant parted like a curtain, its usual holding spell dissipating under the force of her emotion. As she stormed down the hallway, her turbulent magic left a trail of destruction in her wake. The poinsettias wilted, their vibrant red petals turning a mournful gray. String lights dimmed and flickered out one by one, as if each bulb was losing hope. The tinsel, which had danced so merrily earlier, now hung limp and lackluster from the banisters. Behind her, she heard the soft thud of the spellbook falling open. She didn't turn around, didn't want to see Logan's expression or Betty's disappointed ghost. She especially didn't want to see which page the book had chosen to display, though she could feel its ancient magic calling to her, trying to offer comfort she wasn't ready to accept. The chess pieces, still arranged from their earlier performance, toppled over like dominoes as she passed. The king fell last, landing face up with an accusatory clatter. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes somehow managing to sound both magical and melancholy. Logan watched her go, his own magical awareness picking up the waves of pain and power rolling off her. The spellbook lay open at his feet, its pages glowing with a gentle, healing light. The text rearranged itself before his eyes, forming words about magical trauma and the importance of confronting past hurts. A small illustration in the margin showed a phoenix rising from ashes, its wings made of pure light. Betty's ghost hovered nearby, her form growing fainter with distress. "I only wanted to help her heal," she whispered, her spectral spoon hanging limply at her side. "She's carried this burden for so long, believing she hurt Sarah, when really—" The mistletoe above them, recovered from its earlier explosion, shed a single silver tear that fell through Betty's transparent form and landed on the spellbook's open page. Where it touched the parchment, words began to glow. "The heart's magic knows truth even when the mind denies it." The enchanted sweater Logan wore dimmed significantly, missing its partner's light. In the distance, they could hear doors closing and decorations continuing to wilt as Jenna's pain echoed through the magical house. The gingerbread army, sensing the shift in mood, began playing a somber march on their tiny cookie drums. A family photo on the wall caught Logan's eye, a younger Jenna, beaming with magical confidence, standing next to another girl who must have been Sarah. Both wore matching charm bracelets, their hands raised in mid-spell. The frame trembled slightly, affected by the residual magic still crackling through the air. The spellbook's pages turned on their own, revealing more about healing magical trauma, while the remains of the mistletoe's silver sparkles settled around them like stardust, waiting for whatever would come next. Chapter 10. Under the Enchanted Tree. Jenna huddled on the cold bench, pulling her knees to her chest as the town square's massive Christmas tree put on an unwanted light show. Great. Even the decorations were determined to broadcast her emotional state. The tree's lights shifted from melancholy blue to angry red, then swirled into a nauseating pattern that perfectly matched the chaos in her head. "At least pick a color scheme and stick with it," she muttered. The tree responded by cycling through the entire rainbow at double speed. The holiday shoppers paused their gift hunting to gawk at the display. Behind her, the ice skating rink's magical frost went rogue, creating elaborate swirls and fractals that definitely weren't part of its usual winter wonderland routine. A group of teenagers stopped mid-skate to film the phenomenon with their phones. Just what I need to go viral as the witch who gave the town square a nervous breakdown. She buried her face in her hands, but that only made the frost patterns more dramatic, spreading up the rink's barriers in delicate, crystalline representations of her anxiety. Her enchanted sweater chose that moment to warm slightly, and she knew without looking up that Logan had found her. The tree's lights immediately settled into a gentle, golden pulse that made her want to scream. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on her boots. "If you're here to stage another magical intervention, save it. I'm all therapied out." "Actually," Logan's voice was soft as he approached, "I thought you might be cold. The sweater's not as effective when we're apart." The tree, apparently deciding subtlety was overrated, dimmed every light except for a spotlight effect directly over their bench. Several shoppers applauded, probably thinking it was part of the holiday programming. "Seriously?" Jenna glared up at the tree. "What's next? A heavenly choir?" Logan sat beside her, leaving careful space between them. The frost on the rink swirled into heart shapes before Jenna squashed the pattern back into traditional snowflakes through sheer force of will. "You know," he said, watching a group of carolers hurry past their illuminated bench, "I didn't always talk to ghosts. Used to think the whole supernatural thing was nonsense." Despite herself, Jenna turned slightly toward him. The tree's spotlight softened to a warm glow. "My sister Claire was the believer. Used to drive me crazy with her crystal collection and tarot cards." He smiled, but there was an old pain behind it. "She died 6 years ago. Car accident. I was supposed to pick her up that night, but I got caught up at work. Told her to take a cab." The tree's ornaments began to chime softly, creating a gentle harmony that matched his quiet tone. Even the market's wreaths seemed to lean closer, their ribbons rustling sympathetically. "She started visiting me about a week after the funeral. I thought I was losing it. Kept seeing her in mirrors, hearing her laugh in empty rooms. Finally, she managed to get through to me by rearranging my entire kitchen into a message. Not your fault, dummy. Jenna's sweater warmed as Logan continued. That's when I realized some gifts come from our deepest wounds. Claire helped me see that. Now I help other spirits do the same for their loved ones. The frost on the rink spiraled into complex patterns, reflecting Jenna's internal struggle. She watched a snowflake form and dissolve, form and dissolve. Sarah wasn't just my best friend, she finally whispered. The garlands around the market stalls curled inward, creating a cocoon of privacy around their bench. She was the first person who made me believe my magic was beautiful, not just useful. We did everything together. Spells, charms, healing practice. The tree's light steadied, casting a gentle glow as Jenna continued. That day, she seemed off, tired. Her voice caught. I thought I could help. We'd been practicing healing charms all month. I was good at them, really good. So when she collapsed during practice, I tried to heal her. The frost patterns stilled completely, hanging suspended in the winter air. Nothing worked. My magic just bounced off her. She got worse instead of better, and I panicked, which made everything spiral out of control. By the time the ambulance came, Jenna broke off, watching as the tree's lights dimmed to match her mood. I swore I'd never use magic again, not if I couldn't even help the one person who mattered most. The ornaments chimed a soft, mournful note. Logan shifted slightly closer, and this time Jenna didn't pull away. What your grandmother's been trying to tell you, he said carefully, is that Sarah was already sick, terminal. She knew, but she didn't want to tell you. The frost on the rink cracked, creating a sound like breaking glass. That's not... She would have told me. She knew how much you loved healing magic. Didn't want to burden you with something you couldn't fix. Logan's voice remained gentle. Your magic didn't fail that day, Jenna. It was working exactly as it should, showing you what Sarah already knew. The tree's lights flickered rapidly, matching Jenna's racing thoughts. Around them, the market's holiday decorations hung perfectly still, as if holding their breath. But I felt it go wrong, she insisted, even as decade-old memories began to shift and realign. The magic, it just revealed the truth, Logan finished. That's what healing magic does. Sarah's spirit told Betty everything after. She's been trying to help you understand ever since. A single ornament detached itself from the tree and floated down, landing in Jenna's lap. It was a small crystal heart, and when she picked it up, it filled with a warm, familiar light, the exact shade of Sarah's magical signature. The frost on the rink began to thaw slightly, creating delicate rivulets that caught the tree's gentle glow. Jenna's sweater hummed with warmth, synchronizing with Logan's as she turned the crystal heart over in her hands, feeling the echo of her best friend's magic pulse against her palm. The crystal heart pulsed in Jenna's palm, and suddenly she understood what Sarah had been trying to teach her. Magic wasn't about having power over life and death. It was about having the courage to love even knowing you couldn't control everything. The healing spell worked exactly as it should have, Jenna said, finally accepting the truth. It showed me what was happening to Sarah because that's what healing magic does. It reveals truth, even when that truth hurts. And sometimes, Logan added softly, revealing the truth is the first step toward healing something deeper. The crystal heart warmed in response, its light spreading outward like dawn breaking through clouds. Above them, the snow continued to fall in gentle spirals, but it was different now. No longer driven by pain and fear, but dancing with something that felt almost like acceptance. Each flake caught the light from the town square's massive tree, creating tiny prisms that scattered rainbow light across the fresh snow. It's like the magic never really left, Logan observed, watching as the snowflakes caught the tree's gentle light. It's just been waiting for you to be ready. Jenna traced the edge of the crystal heart, her finger leaving trails of golden sparkles. The warmth of it reminded her of Sarah's laugh, of afternoons spent practicing spells until the sun set, of the way magic had once felt as natural as breathing. That's what terrifies me, 10 years of keeping everything locked down tight, and now. She gestured at the dome of snow that had formed around them, a perfect sphere of swirling winter magic. Now it's like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a paper umbrella. The tree's lights rippled in response, creating patterns that mimicked waves breaking against a shore. Each pulse matched the rhythm of Jenna's breathing, growing calmer as Logan shifted closer. You know what I see? He pointed to where the lights danced. That's not chaos. That's your magic finding its natural flow again, like a river after a drought. The tree's display shifted, individual strands of lights weaving together in an intricate dance. Jenna recognized the pattern. It was the same one her charm bracelet made when she'd cast her first successful spell. I spent so long convincing myself that control meant safety, she admitted, watching the lights mirror her memories. If I didn't use magic, I couldn't hurt anyone. If I didn't let anyone close. She broke off as the snow dome sparkled with tiny points of golden light. You couldn't get hurt either? Logan finished softly. The tree's lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, creating a cocoon of warmth around them. Jenna's sweater hummed in response, its pattern shifting to match the gentle swirl of snowflakes. I'm scared, she whispered, and the confession felt like letting go of a breath she'd held for 10 years. Not just of the magic anymore. I'm scared because... The lights in the square began to brighten, responding to her rising emotion. Because this wasn't supposed to be real. You were supposed to be a convenient solution to my mom's holiday guilt trip. Not. The entire square blazed with sudden brilliance, every strand of lights flaring like captured stars. The crystal heart in her palm grew warm, pulsing in time with her racing heartbeat. Not someone who makes me want to risk everything again? Logan's voice held a hint of wonder as he watched the light show her feelings had created. He raised his hand, and the tree's lights began to move in a new pattern, one that Jenna recognized from her childhood spellbooks. It was the signature of raw magic, untamed and beautiful. When I first started seeing ghosts, Logan said, his eyes following the dancing lights, I thought I was losing my mind. But Claire taught me something important. She showed me that sometimes the scariest gifts are the ones we need most. The lights shifted again, forming the same pattern that appeared whenever Jenna's magic slipped free of her control. But seeing it now, reflected in the tree's gentle glow, it didn't look chaotic or dangerous. It looked like starlight given form, like joy made visible. The ghosts taught me that certainty is overrated. Logan continued, his sweater beginning to glow in harmony with hers. Every spirit has their own story, their own way of communicating. I had to learn to trust my instincts, to embrace the uncertainty of never knowing exactly what to expect. The snow dome sparkled more intensely, and Jenna felt something shift inside her, like a door long rusted shut finally creaking open. The crystal heart grew warmer, its light spreading up her arm in delicate spirals. And this, she gestured between them, where their sweaters were creating synchronized patterns of light. How do you embrace the uncertainty of this? Logan's smile held no trace of his usual practiced charm. This was something real, something that made the tree's lights dance with joy. The same way I embrace everything else that matters, one moment at a time. When he leaned in this time, there was no mistletoe compelling them, no magical intervention forcing their hands. Just Jenna's heart racing as she met him halfway, the crystal heart pulsing between them as their lips met. The square erupted in light. Every decoration, from the smallest ornament to the tallest lamppost, blazed with unprecedented brilliance. The tree's lights spiraled upward in a jubilant dance, creating patterns that reflected off the snow dome like aurora borealis brought down to earth. Jenna felt her magic surge in response, no longer fighting for control but flowing naturally, joyfully. Above them, the night sky filled with shimmering ribbons of light, magic and starlight intertwining in a spectacular display. Her sweater, which had been attempting to nudge her toward Logan all evening, finally settled into a content, steady glow. The crystal heart's light spread outward, joining the aurora above as the snow dome slowly dissolved, letting the real world back in. But Jenna barely noticed, too caught up in the way Logan's smile felt against her lips, in the way her magic sang through her veins like a forgotten melody finally remembered. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't try to hold it back. Instead, she let her power dance with the tree's lights, creating patterns that spoke of healing and hope and the courage to begin again. The market's decorations pulsed with warm, steady light, as if applauding their triumph. And somewhere, In the swirl of magic and starlight, Jenna could have sworn she heard the echo of Sarah's laugh, full of joy and free of pain at last. Chapter 11. A Magical Christmas Dinner. The front door opened with a gentle creak as Jenna and Logan stepped into the Matthews home. Jenna braced herself for the usual magical chaos, but the scene before her was startlingly normal. The tinsel hung serenely from the banister, no longer attempting to wrangle passers-by into festive submission. The spellbook sat quietly on its shelf, its pages still for once. Even the gingerbread army stood in perfect formation near the fireplace, their frosting metals gleaming in the soft light. "Well, this is different," Logan murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back. Jenna's enchanted sweater pulsed contentedly, no longer trying to merge her with Logan at every opportunity. "Maybe the house finally ran out of holiday spirit," she whispered hopefully. The scent of fresh-baked cookies wafted from the kitchen, carrying that distinct magical warmth that only her mother's baking could achieve. Mrs. Matthews emerged, clutching a plate of cookies that glowed with gentle golden light. Spelled out in perfect cursive frosting were the words, "I'm sorry," on each one. Her mother's eyes were red-rimmed, mascara slightly smudged, but her smile was genuine. Grandma Betty's ghost hovered nearby, her usual mischievous grin replaced by a serene expression that made her look more solid than Jenna had seen in years. "Honey," her mom started, voice wavering, "I've been thinking about what you said, about Sarah and the accident and why you stopped." She gestured vaguely at the magical ambiance around them. The cookies on the plate trembled slightly, their glow intensifying with Mrs. Matthews' emotion. "I was so focused on preserving our family's legacy that I forgot about preserving you, your feelings, your choices." Jenna felt her throat tighten. The crystal heart in her pocket warmed, responding to the surge of emotion. "Mom, no, let me finish." Mrs. Matthews set down the cookies, wringing her hands. "I saw what happened outside in the square. The lights, the aurora, that was all you, wasn't it? And it was beautiful. Not because it was magic, but because it was you, finally being you again." The family photos lining the walls began to emit a soft golden glow, capturing moments of Jenna's childhood. Her first spell, her 10th birthday party where she'd made the cake float, Sarah teaching her to charm snowflakes into different shapes. Each image pulsed with warm light, like heartbeats of memory. The Christmas tree chimed softly, its ornaments tinkling a gentle melody that sounded suspiciously like Silent Night. "I miss her too," Jenna whispered. And for the first time in years, saying Sarah's name didn't feel like swallowing glass. And I was so scared that using magic would mean losing someone else I loved. Mrs. Matthews crossed the room in 3 quick steps, enveloping Jenna in a hug that smelled like vanilla extract and her mother's perfume. "Oh, sweetheart, magic doesn't cause tragedy. It helps us heal from it." The crystal heart in Jenna's pocket hummed in agreement, its warmth spreading through her like a summer breeze. Her gaze fell on the mantle where her old wand rested, its cherry wood surface still gleaming after all these years. Before she could second-guess herself, Jenna stepped out of her mother's embrace and reached for the wand. It felt warm in her hand, like greeting an old friend. The tip sparked immediately, sending little golden fireworks into the air. "Show off," Jenna muttered fondly, but she was smiling as she raised the wand toward the candy canes hanging on the tree. With a gentle flick, muscle memory was apparently forever, the striped treats unhooked themselves and began a graceful waltz in midair. Logan watched with undisguised delight as the candy canes twirled and dipped. "Now that's what I call a sugar rush." "Well," Grandma Betty's ghost announced, her voice unusually soft, "I'd say my work here is done." Everyone turned to look at her spectral form, which seemed to be growing more translucent by the second. The gingerbread army snapped to attention, and the nutcracker on the mantel raised his tiny sword in salute. "Grandma?" Jenna's voice cracked slightly. "What do you mean?" Betty's ghost smiled, adjusting her ever-present apron. "Did you think I was haunting this house for my health? Dear, I've been waiting for you to remember who you are, to stop running from your magic and your heart." She winked at Logan, who had the grace to blush. "But you can't go," Jenna protested, even as she felt the rightness of it settling in her bones. "Who's going to terrorize my dates and make the mistletoe misbehave?" "Oh, I think you can handle that yourself now." Betty's form shimmed slightly. But first, one last bit of grandmotherly meddling. She raised her spectral wooden spoon like a conductor's baton, and the entire house burst into choreographed chaos. The Nutcracker Brigade marched forward, their wooden feet clicking against the hardwood floor in perfect rhythm. Behind them, the gingerbread army performed an impressive routine that looked suspiciously like the Rockettes' Christmas show. Tinsel unwound itself to form aerial ribbons, through which ornaments soared like acrobats. The candy canes abandoned their waltz for a more upbeat swing dance, while the stockings on the mantel kicked up their toes in a chorus line. Even the Christmas lights joined in, creating a light show that would put Times Square to shame. At the center of it all, Grandma Betty conducted with increasing transparency, her form growing fainter with each wave of her spoon. The spellbook's pages ruffled in applause, and the family photos flashed their lights like cameras at a premiere. Now that, Betty declared as the performance reached its crescendo, is how you exit in style. Her form was barely visible now, just a shimmer in the air. Remember, darling, magic isn't just in the spells, it's in knowing when to let go, when to hold on, and when to trust your heart to know the difference. With a final flourish of her spoon, Betty's ghost faded completely, leaving behind only the faintest scent of her signature snickerdoodles. The Christmas decorations took their final bow, the gingerbread army saluting one last time before returning to their posts. The house settled into a peaceful quiet, broken only by the gentle tinkling of the crystal heart in Jenna's pocket. Her wand felt warm and right in her hand, no longer a reminder of loss, but a promise of possibility. Mrs. Matthews wiped her eyes with her apron, remarkably similar to the one Betty had worn. "Your grandmother," she said with a watery laugh, "always did know how to make an exit." "Yeah," Jenna agreed softly, leaning into Logan's side as his arm slipped around her waist. She really did. The Christmas tree chimed one final time, a sound like bells in the distance, and the enchanted sweaters glowed with gentle, synchronized light. Above the mantel, a new photo frame appeared, showing Betty in her favorite apron, wooden spoon raised triumphantly. As they watched, the image winked. Jenna traced her finger along the wand's familiar grooves, still processing Betty's dramatic departure, when Logan cleared his throat. "So, about our arrangement?" He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically nervous. The enchanted sweater pulsed with a warm glow against his chest. "Right?" Jenna's stomach dropped. "The contract. I should probably get your payment." "No, that's not." Logan ran a hand through his hair. "Look, being your fake boyfriend was a job, but falling in love with you?" His eyes met hers, sincere and slightly scared. "That wasn't in any contract." Above them, every sprig of enchanted mistletoe in the house burst simultaneously into shimmering gold dust, raining down like starlight. The crystal heart in Jenna's pocket hummed a perfect high C. Before Jenna could respond, the family spellbook launched itself off its shelf, floating down between them with theatrical timing that would have made Betty proud. It opened with a flourish to a page titled "Love-Enhanced Magic, When Heart and Power Align." Tucked inside was one of Betty's recipe cards, the edges worn soft with age. In her grandmother's familiar scrawl, the secret ingredient is always love, and maybe a dash of cinnamon. "Of course you'd leave me a magical rom-com moment," Jenna muttered skyward, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Mrs. Matthews appeared at her daughter's side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your grandmother always said magic flows best when your heart is open. Remember how she used to enchant the holiday lights, made them dance like the northern lights on Christmas Eve?" The memory stirred something in Jenna. She raised her wand, letting instinct guide her. Golden lights spiraled from the tip, weaving through the air like ribbon candy. The magic felt different now, warmer, fuller, no longer fighting to break free, but flowing naturally, as if it had just been waiting for her to remember how to dance with it. The light display spread across the ceiling, rippling in waves of emerald, ruby, and gold. Tiny sparks broke off like shooting stars, forming familiar patterns. Betty's wooden spoon conducting a symphony, gingerbread men doing the cha-cha, candy canes spelling out joy in cursive. "Oh, sweetheart, Mrs. Matthews wiped her eyes. "That's exactly how she used to do it. Remember the Christmas when she enchanted all the snowflakes to sing carols? The neighbors thought we'd hired an invisible choir. The Christmas decorations twinkled in approval as Mrs. Matthews shared more stories. Betty's legendary magical cookie exchanges, the year she charmed the advent calendar to give everyone their heart's desire, mostly chocolate. The time she accidentally gave the snowman in the front yard tap dancing skills. As they laughed, Jenna felt the enchanted sweater's grip finally loosen. She looked down to find it had transformed into normal knitwear, albeit with a faint, cozy glow that intensified whenever Logan stood near. His sweater had done the same, the matching set now more sweet than supernatural. Finally, Jenna sighed, rolling her shoulders. I was starting to think we'd be stuck in these forever. I don't know, Logan grinned. They kind of grew on me. A formal drum roll from the direction of the kitchen interrupted them. The gingerbread army marched in with military precision, led by their captain bearing a cookie medal on a ribbon of red licorice. They halted before Logan, presenting arms with tiny candy cane swords. The captain stepped forward, his frosting medals gleaming. In a voice that somehow managed to be both crisp and crumbly, he announced, "For valor in the face of magical mayhem, and for helping our beloved Miss Jenna remember her spark, we hereby present you with the Order of the Sugar Plum." Jenna rolled her eyes as Logan solemnly bent down to receive his cookie medal, but she couldn't hide her smile, especially when the Christmas tree's lights rearranged themselves into a perfect heart behind them, twinkling in a rhythm that felt suspiciously like Betty's favorite waltz. Your grandmother would have loved him, you know, Mrs. Matthews said softly, watching as Logan attempted to teach the gingerbread soldiers a fist bump without breaking their arms off. She did, Jenna replied, touching the crystal heart in her pocket. Why else would she have gone to all this trouble? The spellbook's pages ruffled in agreement, and the recipe card bookmark glowed faintly. Jenna picked it up, turning it over to find more of Betty's handwriting on the back. Love is the best magic of all, but proper timing and good butter are close seconds. Logan straightened up, his cookie medal hanging proudly against his softly glowing sweater. So, he said, reaching for her hand, what do you say? Ready to stop pretending? The Christmas tree chimed hopefully, and somewhere in the distance, Jenna could have sworn she heard the faint sound of Betty's laugh.